Victoria's population is growing, and Moreland is growing too. It's estimated that the Melbourne area will grow from 5 to 8 million people in the next few decades. They need to live somewhere. Some will choose to live here in Moreland. It's a great place to live. Moreland Council knows the challenges and opportunities that this increase in population brings. With 43,000 more people living here by 2036, there are important things to consider, plan for and act on. Things like housing, transport, our open spaces and managing the impacts of construction activity. 43,000 new people, or around 18,000 new households, means taller buildings or more buildings on existing blocks. This is not what many of us are used to, but lifestyles are changing and we need to adapt. We want to encourage these taller buildings to be located near public transport routes and where daily needs like shopping and community services are just a walk away. This way, more people won't mean lots more traffic and congestion. More flexible use of our industrial land can help too. Some land can change to accommodate new work and local jobs, and some can provide housing for more people. We are also looking at ways that some housing can remain more affordable. Council is actively buying property to improve and purchase new parks and open spaces for all residents to enjoy. This is about thoughtful planning for a great future for everyone. The things we love, the vibrant and thriving shopping areas, our great heritage areas will still be here. But changes need to happen. We want to make sure that any development is of high quality and improves livability. So we're making decisions based on research, data, world's best practice and consultation with the community. Together, we can continue to make Moreland a great place to live for our long-term residents, our new arrivals and for those who'd like to live here in the future. Moreland, one community, proudly diverse. By 2036, it's estimated there'll be 43,000 more people living here in Moreland. And they're all going to need to move about. To walk, cycle, drive, bus, tram, train, use shared vehicles, and whatever technology emerges next. Smart, effective transport is vital. So Moreland Council has plans to help keep us moving now and into the future. Our road network is already congested and more cars will only make that worse. We need to limit the number of additional cars travelling and parking around our city if we want to keep our quality of life or make it better. Building wider or more roads isn't the answer. There just isn't land available without immense cost. The answer is in making other forms of transport more attractive, practical, accessible and available. We're lucky. Parts of Moreland are rich with transport options. In these areas, there are more opportunities to change the way we move around, and we're working to create even more transport options for everyone throughout Moreland. We're going to give more space to pedestrians and cyclists and work with the state government to improve public transport. We want residents who move into new housing that's close to public transport and shopping areas to bring fewer cars with them. We're encouraging this by allowing fewer spaces within these new buildings and continuing to limit access to on-street parking permits for these new residences. This will only happen in activity centres and not in other parts of the city. Parking restrictions already exist in many parts of the city, and we're going to extend these to better manage parking in and around our business and shopping areas. We don't want the sought-after parking in these areas taken up all day by just one car. We want to ensure the spaces can be used by multiple people visiting our shops, doing business, using our facilities and spending time in cafes and restaurants. Of course, for some people and situations, car travel is a necessity. We're not stopping that. We're encouraging viable alternatives because small changes can lead to big differences. That change starts with us. Victoria's population is growing, and Moreland is growing too. It's estimated that the Melbourne area will grow from 5 to 8 million people in the next few decades. They need to live somewhere. Some will choose to live here in Moreland. It's a great place to live. Moreland Council knows the challenges and opportunities that this increase in population brings. With 43,000 more people living here by 2036, there are important things to consider, plan for and act on. Things like housing, transport, our open spaces and managing the impacts of construction activity. 43,000 new people, or around 18,000 new households, means taller buildings or more buildings on existing blocks. This is not what many of us are used to, but lifestyles are changing and we need to adapt. We want to encourage these taller buildings to be located near public transport routes and where daily needs like shopping and community services are just a walk away. This way, more people won't mean lots more traffic and congestion. More flexible use of our industrial land can help too. Some land can change to accommodate new work and local jobs, and some can provide housing for more people. We are also looking at ways that some housing can remain more affordable. Council is actively buying property to improve and purchase new parks and open spaces for all residents to enjoy. This is about thoughtful planning for a great future for everyone. The things we love, the vibrant and thriving shopping areas, our great heritage areas will still be here. But changes need to happen. We want to make sure that any development is of high quality and improves livability. So we're making decisions based on research, data, world's best practice and consultation with the community. Together, we can continue to make Moreland a great place to live for our long-term residents, our new arrivals and for those who'd like to live here in the future. Moreland, one community, proudly diverse.
İsmim Cemal Akdeniz. Avustralya'ya 1974 yılında geldim ve ilk yerleştiğim bölgelerden bir tanesi Brunswick. Moreland bölgesi Türklerin yoğun olarak oturmuş olduğu bir bölgeydi. Bu bölgeye yerleşmemize neden oldu. Tabii ki ilk geldiğimizde dil bilmiyoruz. Bu nedenle dilimizi konuşan insanlarla beraber olmaktan daha doğal bir şey yoktu. O nedenle buraya geldik. Moreland bölgesinde ilk banka memurları Türkçe bilen elemanlar bulundurmaktaydı.
Good evening, everyone. Councillors, members of the gallery and to our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Natalie Aboud and I am the chairperson of the council meeting for planned and related matters. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's meeting. Our meeting is being held on the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and also pay respects to elders from other communities who may be here with us this evening. I acknowledge that currently many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people call Moreland home. I also acknowledge that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people never ceded sovereignty of their lands and have continuously cared for their country for over 60,000 years as the world's oldest living culture. Members of the gallery, please note that this planning and related matters meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to Council's website and Facebook. This recording will also be available as video on demand. Gallery attendees are advised that they will be recorded during the meeting. Councillors, just as a reminder that in line with the adopted councillor conduct principles as outlined in the Councillor Code of Conduct, councillors should ensure that they conduct themselves in the meeting with integrity, impartially exercise their responsibilities in the interest of the local community and not improperly seek to confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support principles for leadership and good governance that secures public confidence in the office of councillor. Members of the gallery, in the event of an emergency or disruption, we may be required to take action to ensure the safety of attendees. Please follow the directions issued by council staff and security officers. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. Now, in case you're wondering why I was speaking so slowly, I was just waiting for us to have 6 people at the table, because without 6 people at the table, we don't have a quorum and we can't make decisions. This is part of the meeting procedure local law. So we have enough councillors in attendance, and I'd like to introduce those councillors. Councillor Bolton.
How's it going?
Councillor Jess Dorney. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mark Riley. Councillor Alia Farnley. And Councillor Dale Martin.
Hi, everyone.
Now, we've heard that Councillor John Kavanagh will be a little bit late, and we've also heard that Councillor Yildiz will be late. The officers in attendance tonight are Narelle Jennings, to my left, the Acting Group Manager of City Development, Darren Camilleri, the Acting Unit Manager of Urban Planning, Andy Wilson, the Acting Planning Coordinator, Vita Galanti, Planning Coordinator, Team Leader of Governance, Ali Brown, and Governance Officer, Saskia Hunter. Councillors, I note that a leave of absence has been granted to Councillor Carly Hannon from the 11th of April to the 12th of August 2019, to Councillor Davidson from the 19th of June to the 31st of July 2019, and to Councillor Tapanos from the 17th of June to the 30th of July 2019. So there are no further apologies, because we know that the other councillors are en route. And I'll now move to declaration of interests and or conflicts of interest. So councillors, are there any interests or conflicts of interest to declare?
Yes, Chair. I've got a conflict of interest with DCF 49/19, 92 to 104 Lowson Street, Fawkner. I have a property in close proximity.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Farnley. I've also heard that although he's not here and he can outline the details when he does get here and we get to that item, that Councillor Kavanagh also has a conflict with the same item. So that's Councillor Kavanagh's conflict with item DCF 49/19, which is 92 to 104 Lowson Street. Do you say Lowson or Lowson? Locals?
Listen.
Lowson? Lowson? Yeah, depends where you come from. Okay, that street, which is said either Lowson or Lowson in Fawkner. So, could I please have an adoption, could I please have a motion for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of May, 2019? Councillor Riley? And Councillor Martin to second. Is there any debate about that item? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried. So, I wish to give you an outline of how the Planning and Related Matters meeting will run this evening. Firstly, the relevant planner will introduce the report and officers' recommendations. Then I will give any objectors the opportunity to move to the lectern and give their submission. After this time, the applicant will be given the opportunity to speak. If you are making a submission, please clearly state your name and address for the record. You are requested to present viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the discussion focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, would you please inform the meeting why you are opposed and suggest an alternative approach, which would satisfy your concerns. Please use this opportunity to focus on your concerns rather than matters of detail in the officer's report. Please note that there is a 3-minute limit for each speaker, but as chairperson, I reserve the right to increase or reduce the time available to any speaker. I have determined that the ordering of reports listed in the published agenda will change slightly to ensure tonight's meeting runs more efficiently. So the first report listed on the published agenda, DCF 49/19, Lowson or Lowson, will now be the last report considered this evening, since we have the 2 conflicts of interest on that item, because otherwise we'll lose quorum again. We won't have enough people to vote until the late councillors arrive. So the first report that we will address this evening is DCF 50/19, 116 Dukes Road, Fawkner, Planning Permit MPS 2018-645. So I'll move to the officer to present the report. Thank you.
So, as mentioned, this is an application at 116 Dukes Road, Fawkner, for the development of the land for 5 triple-storey dwellings. The site is located in an area specified for increased housing density. So it's in the Bonwick Street neighbourhood centre, which is a site which is zoned residential growth zone. It is affected by a number of overlays, including a design and development overlay, which sets out the preferred built form, including height and setbacks. It's just an image up on the screen of the subject site with 2 mature street trees in the front nature strip. The proposal is for 5 triple-storey dwellings, and it's generally comprising car parking at ground floor, living areas at first floor, and bedrooms at the second floor. And this is a 3D perspective of what the development would look like. In terms of consultation, the application attracted 31 objections, with the main issues raised being car parking, traffic, and neighbourhood character. A planning information and discussion meeting was held in late May, which was attended by 2 councillors and 7 objectors. City Development is recommending that the application be approved, subject to conditions. The proposal has strategic support given its location in the Bonwick Street neighbourhood centre, and it achieves a high level of compliance with the relevant provisions of the Moreland Planning Scheme, including the preferred height and setbacks in the design and development overlay. Key conditions of the recommendation include an increase to the size of the study of dwelling 1, which will also necessitate the dwelling being reduced from a 3-bedroom dwelling to a 2-bedroom dwelling. Also an increase in landscaping, particularly along the vehicle access way, and a reduction of render to the upper levels. And subject to those conditions, City Development recommends the application be approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any objectors or submitters who wish to speak? Out of 31 of you, there must be somebody.
Hi, Joe Perry, Falkland Residents Association, and I'm here to voice my objection to the proposed development. First, the development is completely out of character with the suburb, and the developer could have done much, much better by the future residents of 116 Dukes Road, the neighbours, the community council, and even the environment. What we have is a development that will diminish the quality of living of the neighbours and value of their properties. And because it's put profit before people by squeezing in as many vertical shoeboxes as possible onto a single block, it's done so with no regard to the livability and health-related outcomes. What does it say about the care factor of a development that doesn't even provide a visitor car park for the residents? With living areas located on level 1 and above, for people with disability and mobility issues, there's nothing for you at 116 Dukes Road. In the Planning Department's report, it predicted an additional 24 car movements along Dukes Road. In isolation, that doesn't sound like much at all, but it didn't reference the impact of the additional cars from the 9 townhouses at 3, 5 and 7 Dukes Road, the 5 townhouses at 106 Dukes Road, or the 3-storey development at 123 Dukes Road. Among its many failings, the development only provides for the barest car parking, and I have absolutely no doubt that the residents of 116 Dukes Road will park a minimum of 5 cars in the car park at the Bonwick Street shopping centre. So much for Council's multi-million-dollar improvement of the shopping precinct. And then there's the noise factor, generated by 5 families living in close proximity to each other as they come and go day and night, and its impact on the residents themselves and the nearby neighbours. Or the noise from 5 air conditioners needed to cool the dwellings in summer, negating any runoff capture and greenhouse benefits. No doubt the developer, in the defence of the project, will say that it ticks all the boxes with respect to codes, rules and regulations, which unfortunately is no different to the argument used by cigarette companies in the gaming industry. So because this development has a care factor of nil for people with disability and mobility issues, or the social and community harm that this project is going to leave behind for the buyers, neighbours and council to deal with, it's for that reason that I oppose this objection, that I submit my objection.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Anyone else who would like to speak to this application? Plenty of time. Yep. Thank you.
Look, I'm a resident of Jukes Road, Faulkner, 120 Jukes Road, Faulkner, and I've been living there 55 years.
Could we have your name?
Carlo Gubana, G-U-B-A-N-A.
Thank you, Carlo.
Okay? And I have seen a lot of chances there. By all means, please don't mind this happening. Please. Would you like, you people, have something next door to you? Pigeon boxes? Consider that, please, people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlo.
Evening, excuse me. Evening, councillors. My name is Jeremy Nash, and I'm from 32 Percy Street. And full disclosure, I live in a subdivided block. So we live in the back of the house. Someone built the house behind the house they were living in. It was built to code. A car could easily turn around and pull out forwards as it's meant to do. However, the neighbor, who was a good friend of mine actually, drove a massive four-wheel drive, and there was no way he was going to be able to park behind his house in the car park that was approved according to the specs that all planners, I would hope, would try to achieve. So just a few interesting facts about Faulkner, and this will tie into the cultural feel of the neighborhood. We are a closed neighborhood. We have 3 religious centers. We have 2 private schools. We also have Sealed Air, which has about 471 staff. So in addition to increasing this density, we naturally have, round figures to give you an idea, at the private school, you've got 1,400 students. Not all of them live in Faulkner. Not all of them are walking. They're being driven in by their parents, and they're being driven back out. 0.7% of all Faulkner residents from the 2016 census actually take the bus to work. So what this means is, even if half of those kids lived in our neighborhood, and even if they carpooled and they were responsible, there were an extra 200 cars coming in the morning, an extra 200 cars leaving in the afternoon. This is on top of the extra 2 cars per unit, statistically, that these developments are going to be putting in on Jukes Road. So you've got 4 or 5 developments, minimum 10 more cars, 10 more cars per, because we're talking 5 units. We're talking 40 cars with 1 off-street parking per. It just does not mesh with what Faulkner is all about. You've got 63% of adults, working adults, reliant on car as their primary mode of transportation to get to work. Every plan I've seen has said it is eco-friendly, it encourages public transport, it's all great. It'd be perfect for Brunswick, it'd be perfect for Coburg. Faulkner just does not have the capacity to handle all of the traffic that's coming in from people who don't live there. They're welcome to come, but they don't live there, and those stats are not being taken into account when we're putting in 4 or 5 of these all along a single stretch of road. So for that is why I submit my objection against the development. It is completely out of character for the area, not just visually, but it actually doesn't suit the demographic of the people who live in that community, and I feel we should have a right to stop this from happening.
Thank you, Jeremy. Are there any other speakers that... Yep.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Peter Childers. I live in 6 Pennycourt, Faulkner, Faulkner. I'd like to object about this development for the following reasons, which mostly were covered from the previous speakers. This three-story development is, to my mind, is out of character for the neighborhood there. Car parking is not enough, and no visitors parking as far as I know. We need to have more open space, and the traffic is going to happen and to bring, of course, in that Jukes Road, which is every one of you know. If you go certain times of the day, really it's backing up very, very back from Sydney Road. Overlooking, I think, has to be addressed. I think a feel for those people, for the houses living on the left and the right side of the building, that you have to take into consideration. I back all the points the previous speakers make, and this is my points I've just raised. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers who would like to speak to this item? Yep. I think there are no other speakers against, so I can now hear from the applicant or a representative of the applicant. Please come forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Luca McConjic. I'm from Luca McConjic Town Planning Services. I'm speaking on behalf of the developer. In relation to this particular proposal, we support the recommendation of the council officers. They've gone through a rather exhaustive process. But the first thing that I'd like to talk about is in terms of the residential growth zone, it only encompasses a very small area around the shopping centre. So in terms of the planning scheme encouraging dwelling diversity, the only real opportunity within this part of Faulkner to develop these types of buildings are in this small area that's around the shopping centre. And the majority of Faulkner is within a neighbourhood residential zone where there will be very little change, minimal change, and also within the general res zone where there's limited incremental change that can occur. So in terms of these types of buildings, they're very limited in terms of where they can be placed, and the planning scheme provides that guidance. In terms of, there's two other examples that have been at 106 and 112 that have been approved. I've got plans here. They also include three-storey forms. Our property is within 5 properties of that, and in terms of the practice note, in terms of developing a neighbourhood site description plan, how it informs the design response, they generally say within 5 properties are key features, and in terms of how it will inform this proposal, and we are within 5 properties of the 2 previous approvals that include 3-storey development. The other thing with this particular site in the short term, it's less sensitive than the other sites where there's been 6 units approved at 112. In terms of, on both sides, we have, of the subject site, we have driveways, and also towards the rear, the property at the rear has sheds and garages. So in terms of the interface, this site has a good opportunity. In terms of the purpose of the zone, the proposal satisfies the purpose of the zone. And there's also VCAT decisions which talk about not wasting an opportunity in terms of development. And especially here, we are in a very small residential growth zone. So, so in terms of diversity, this small area provides a type of housing that satisfies council's objective for diversity, especially in a residential growth zone.
Thank you.
Anyways, thanks very much.
Councillors, do you have any questions to put to the officer? Councillor Bolton?
Hi, I was wondering if you'd ever given thought to maybe just doing 4 units rather than 5. 5 just seems quite excessive for the site.
Yeah. In terms of a few doors down, there's been a permit issued for 6 on a mid-block, on the same size mid-block. The other corner is also, it comes down, it's also a 3-storey development. And in terms of developing this type of application, unfortunately, reducing the number of dwellings, I don't believe that the client would entertain that. A lesser number of dwellings probably wouldn't be financially viable. But again, viability in a residential growth zone where people pay a premium on the basis of that particular zone, I think it's important. And there are VCAT decisions that talk about not wasting an opportunity. There's one, Teschendorf versus Merri-bek, and also McCall versus Stonington Council. Both those decisions.
Sorry, I'll just have to stop you because I think Councillor Bolton was just about whether the applicant had considered doing less, and I think we've seen that that is not the case.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the councillors? Councillor Farnley, sorry.
No worries. Has your developer thought about making the units livable for people with disabilities or needs to be able to move around?
Again, in this type of development where they're more than 1 storey, again, in a residential growth zone, it implies up to 4 storeys is possible. Now, it would be very difficult for somebody to reside in one of these places. But it all comes down to diversity. Again, we're talking about a small area that's been designated in a residential growth zone. So, and there are plenty of other opportunities in terms of within the neighbourhood residential zone where nearly all of the houses are of a single level, or if there are going to be units, they're more than likely going to be 2-bedroom units at the back of existing houses. So, in terms of the surrounding area, there are opportunities for that, but this again provides housing for a younger demographic. It provides a different form of housing. So now, for me to say that this can be made accessible, I mean, it's not considered accessible, and there's no real requirement, especially in such a limited area. This provides that diversity, more so for younger people.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Just in terms of some of the concerns that have been elicited tonight from the objectors, can you clarify the concerns, or some of the concerns regarding overlooking? I didn't notice this in the report, but I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that, please.
Again, in terms of overlooking, clear windows will be at a sill height of 1.7. Again, permit conditions can be imposed to require particular standards of res code being met. In terms of these elevations, the clear windows are at 1.7 sill height, so to eliminate overlooking.
Any other? Councillor Martin?
Thanks for coming. I just wanted to ask what the expected NATHERS rating of the buildings are going to be.
Sorry?
The NATHERS rating, the NATHERS rating of the buildings, so the thermal efficiency. Do you know it's going to be a 6 stars, 6.5, 7?
Well, it's been covered in the report and on file. There has been sustainability. A specialist sustainability officer has compiled it, and I'm pretty sure it's in the council notes as well in terms of what it achieves. So in terms of the officer recommendation.
So you're not aware off the top of your head?
Well, basically, we rely on consultants, specialist consultants for that level of information. So and that was asked for at the further information stage which was provided. So, and the recommendations, as far as we're concerned, have been accepted and they've been incorporated in the amended plans.
Any other questions from councillors? I'm interested to know, even the state government is understanding the value of installing solar panels, and I noticed there's nothing to do with that on this particular site, and we're trying to think about the affordability of the type of people that will move into this, and you're talking about young families and that sort of thing, and the cost of living and electricity is going up and et cetera, et cetera. I'm interested to know why there was no consideration for solar panels on the building, considering there will need to be, you know, however many air conditioners fitted to the building and this sort of thing.
Yeah. Again, that can easily be dealt with as a condition on permit, and I would welcome something like solar boosted hot water. I think that's a very pragmatic solution. So I don't believe that there's any issue in terms of putting the panels. The buildings, they lend themselves, and the roof, they're able to be installed. So in terms of solar, I don't think that that the developer would object, and I'd welcome a permit condition on top of what's already been recommended, requiring solar panels. So, and based on the amount of roof space that's available.
Thank you. Jess, Councillor
yeah. Mine's just about the permeability of the site. I know that you're working, there's a condition in the report and the permit condition around looking at best practice with storm management. And there is quite a lot of impervious surface. I know that it is compliant, but there is quite a big driveway, and I'm just wondering about permeable surfaces as well as rainwater gardens. And I know it's kind of a balance of one or the other, but I'm just wondering if there's an option, like given the lower ESD of the building, are you considering potentially both? Like, or would you be open to a condition that looks at permeable road surface?
I think a pragmatic solution might be that at the moment we've got a driveway that's exposed aggregate. There is the possibility of permeable concrete. So in terms of breaking up, and which would also visually help, we could break up sections of the common driveway to have sections that are permeable concrete and impermeable as well. So we could consider additional permeable concrete being put in as a condition of permit. So it's actually quite common now, especially with a lot of these ESD requirements, to actually, and it's becoming quite popular. So the actual concrete itself becomes permeable.
Thank you. Probably this is a question for officers, but I'm interested to know about the VCAT hearing for 106. Do we know, perhaps there were residents in the room that attended some of that objection, some of that case at VCAT, but I'm interested to know, do we know or can we share how much money was spent on objecting to that application at VCAT from council's perspective? Is it confidential information, or do we not know? Or was it like officer time in kind, or?
Yeah, so I guess it would likely be officer time.
Yeah.
I would have to check the details of the application. I'm not aware of whether or not we engaged consultants for that particular.
Yeah, and I'm of the understanding that 106 was objected, and the objection was knocked back by VCAT and it was approved by VCAT. Is that correct?
That's correct. So council refused an application on that site for 6 dwellings, and it was ultimately approved at VCAT for 5 dwellings.
Yeah, and was that application approved under delegation, or did it come through the chamber? I just can't remember.
I recall that it was refused under delegation.
By council planners, thank you. And then the next question was 112. Can you give me the same information on 112? Did it go to VCAT? Was it refused and was it upheld?
112, to my knowledge, was one that was approved by council officers. It was one that was dealt with prior to the introduction of the design and development overlay.
Yep.
So there were different
Yep, okay, thank you. All right, I think you can have a seat now, please.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just double check that no one else had any other questions. Okay, so if there are no further questions, can I have a motion, please, from councillors regarding this item? Councillor Martin, look at us racing. Sorry, did he beat you, Councillor Riley?
Just
So I'd like to move the officer recommendation with a slight amendment to add in the solar panels as discussed.
Yeah, and I think
with
we've
the
got some
applicant.
words for that.
can we also,
So if I have a seconder, I'll talk.
Councillor Riley is happy to second.
So I think, as you can see, we weren't jumping to move and second this motion. Basically, this is a pretty average development, but it fits within the planning scheme. It ticks all the boxes as far as the bare minimums are concerned. It's in a residential growth zone, so that whole stretch, I would be expecting within 10 years that essentially all of them move to this type of development. Obviously, pending planning scheme changes in which we're trying to enact to actually improve the ESD, the design of buildings to make sure that they're actually more livable than these things that are going in currently. I think it's really important to note that sometimes as councillors we have to make decisions not based on developments that we want to see go in. It's actually based on knowing that we really have no defence if this was to go to VCAT. It fits within the scheme. I think some of the issues that were raised are really, really good points. I think, the DDA, accessibility, those things, as well as the ESD, we are trying to improve that. We're going through planning scheme changes. We're about to kick some off, and we included some in the budget process. I think also talking about parking management, which seems to be a real issue up in that neck of the woods. Councils, we recently approved our new parking management policy and framework. So if you do have parking issues, there are tools for residents to try and alleviate that, especially with some of these new developments going in. One of the rules in the parking management policy is that if you actually have a development that's newer than 2011 and parking restrictions go in on your street, it doesn't give you rights to getting parking permits out on your street. So it does protect residents with existing older dwellings and does disincentivise those newer residents from parking on the street. So that's part of the framework which we have in place already. It's available to residents. So as I said, I'm not overly jumping for joy at this application. I think there's a lot of things that could be improved. There's a lot of better developments that we see go in, but it does fit the bare minimum for this residential growth zone. And I think with the addition of the additional solar panels in there will slightly improve it. But again, this is the scheme that we have to work within, and I hope that residents want to work with us to improve the planning scheme, because at the end of the day, developers will build what the planning scheme says they're allowed to. And so if you work with us to improve that planning scheme, that is really the tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak to the motion? That's okay.
thank you. Look, I'm rising to reluctantly support this amendment, but the motion with the amendment. Certainly it needs to have higher environmental improvements. So I think I'm aware that one may be coming very shortly. So an additional requirements. So just in speaking to this, this falls way below my expectation. But when I measure it up in terms of what the planning scheme requires and whether this will go to VCAT and whether we would require to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on a VCAT case, whether that's good use of council resources and neighbours and citizens' resources, I have to really ask myself, question that as a strategy. That doesn't preclude it by going to VCAT by the residents doing that, but I'm given my experience, I just don't see there's a great chance that many of the objections that you've raised would get a sufficient hearing there to succeed. So I'm talking in a very negative sense about this, as you obviously gathered. So it barely meets the requirements. I'm very concerned about the lack of accessibility. I mean, the cars get better treatment there than people with disability access, which is quite saying something about our society, I think. I understand that the public transport issues are a grave concern. We've been advocating on these for many years as council. We need to do better, and I would like to work closely with the community to get better public transport for Fawkner, because it's woeful, and the speakers tonight have demonstrated that ably. So there's a whole lot of reasons why this is barely acceptable under the planning scheme. It doesn't personally meet my expectation, but under the planning scheme, it's barely accessible. So do you want to move that? Your motion?
What's the best process?
Yeah,
so I'd just like to make a slight amendment. I don't have words, but am sort of hoping for some advice from officers just around requiring that the hard surfaces include all permeable materials.
Yep, so we'll just, have you got something there? Yep, okay, so we'll just get some words together for that, and then if it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder, we can incorporate it into as part of the motion, and if it isn't, we can find you a seconder and take it from there. So we're just clarifying some detail about an amendment that's been proposed by Councillor Dorney that addresses the impervious nature of some of the area outside of the dwellings themselves. In the driveway, isn't it? In the driveway area.
particularly the driveway.
Yeah, particularly in the driveway, but all hard surfaces.
Yep. All pervious and impervious areas accounted for. Pervious paving must be included for part of the driveway. Yep. So the new words that have been added to the point 2 are pervious paving must be included for part of the driveway. Is that suitable to the mover and seconder of the motion? Yep. Yep. And Jess, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just really briefly, I think reluctantly echo all of the points made by our councillors tonight. Unfortunately, I would love to say no to this development tonight, and standing up here is sometimes one of the hardest things, particularly in this planning environment where you have to make these decisions that are ultimately the decisions that are set through the Victorian planning scheme. And when there's a precedent that's been set, as we've heard of, as for 103 and number 112, I believe, we just basically don't have a leg to stand on in terms of the VCAT appeal process for this. ESD is something that we do need to be considering in the livability and resilience of our communities moving forward. This does have quite poor yet acceptable ESD outcomes for as per the planning scheme, and I just think that really addressing the permeability where we can of the site just helps with stormwater runoff, particularly with the more decent flood events we are seeing, the heavier rain when we're getting it, and the ability to allow that water to not just run off down our stormwater drains, but actually start to sink back into our groundwater again. So it's a little bit that I can do right now, and reluctantly have to support the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Dorney. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against Councillor Bolton?
I can understand councillors feeling nervous about the VCAT process and so forth, but I can't in good conscience vote in favour of this development. Probably, I mean, they're not the only reasons, but probably two critical reasons for me is not a single dwelling is accessible, not a single dwelling, and, really, areas close to shops prime spots for people who are elderly or people with disabilities. Secondly, I think its close proximity with the Bonwick Street Dukes Road intersection, which has become quite dangerous in recent years. It never used to be so dangerous, maybe 6 years ago or so when the street was a bit quieter, but now there is sort of like a bit of semi-road rage, maybe not quite road rage, but getting close to that in that street and around that intersection. And I think the location of this development with the number of vehicle movements and the movements already in that area are highly problematic and quite dangerous. My third point is, while it is true that there have been occasions when council has rejected applications and they've been approved by VCAT, what we heard just before when the Mayor asked the council officer a question, where council did reject one of the other developments in relatively close proximity, while VCAT overturned the council's decision, they did cut the number of dwellings from 6 to 5. So, I mean, I think we shouldn't be entirely defeatist with about, you know, I mean, yes, it is true, VCAT is loaded again in favour of developers and against residents, but it doesn't always mean that all bad developments get passed by VCAT or unamended. So I don't think we should be totally defeatist about these bad proposals. And I just can't in good conscience vote in favour of this.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any councillors that would like to speak in favour of the motion? So I just wanted to, are there any other speakers that would like to speak against? Yeah, so I'll just make some comments and then you can speak against. I just have a question, first of all. Is the level of accessible dwellings grounds for a VCAT refusal to be upheld? Do we know? Like, if we refuse this on the fact that it has no accessible or visitable dwellings, would that be likely to be upheld at VCAT? Do we know?
It's not a mandatory requirement of the planning scheme.
Okay,
it's
thanks.
Something that's encouraged in the policy.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so there's a couple of things to address. You know, when you are a developer, I guess you're leaving legacy. In this case, the legacy that's being left is what we deem to be adequate rather than sensational or inspiring or of a great standard or of a high living quality or any of the other things. And I think that's important to note. But unfortunately, and I don't think I am being defeatist, I think I'm being a realist, I don't think that this is likely to be upheld. I don't think it's likely to go from 5 to 4 the same way as the other one went from 6 to 5 at 106 Dukes Road. So I think that refusing it is just not something that's a realistic, that is a realistic opportunity for any kind of success with this. I guess I'd like to commend the developer for taking on the idea of looking at the pervious paving and also the idea of adding solar, because whoever's going to end up living in this place still deserves to have some quality of living. I'm absolutely really disappointed by the fact that there is no visibility and no accessibility for this whole block. I think that's a lost opportunity, and I agree with Councillor Bolton's comments about the fact that it's right next to that shopping centre and the leisure centre, and which has quite an older cohort that do water aerobics and all kinds of stuff there, as well as the Senior Citizens Centre, which has a new room that's just being opened up. I think the facilities are getting better and better in Fawkner because the city is having an investment put into it, and I don't think that the adequacy of this development matches the investment that the council is making into Fawkner, which I find disappointing, but I also feel like I can't look it back. I'd like to speak to the issue of the traffic and the parking. I've been following up a few scenarios with traffic counts and stuff on Dukes Road, and I don't know if the trailer's arrived there that tells you what speed you're doing, but if it hasn't, I can follow it up. But I think it's really important that we continue to hear from the community, no matter what happens tomorrow or next year, about traffic on Dukes Road and what that's looking like. And I think it would be a good idea if someone follows up with me or with anyone else the idea of looking at parking restrictions in the Bonwick Shopping Centre that is being rebuilt, because that will mean that cars won't necessarily be able to not park in their garages or on the site of this development if it's built. They won't be able to park in the Bonwick Shopping Centre, and that will be able to be protected for traders and shoppers who have you know, responsibility and obligation and rights to that space. So I just wanted to encourage anyone to maybe ask for 2-hour restrictions, or we can work that through anyhow. But I won't be voting against the motion, even though I am nowhere near overjoyed to support it. Councillor Farnley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions, and I do acknowledge that obviously the mover and the seconder are not super excited about this particular development. Thank you to everyone who's come along and made a contribution tonight. Your contributions are all very valuable and very welcome, and you've actually highlighted a couple of key areas which I actually didn't see myself. It's in that light that I'll be voting against providing a permit for this application, and we'll be proposing that we move an alternative to Council Officer's recommendation. Given I don't have the words prepared myself, I'll probably be asking for the Mayor to table this report so the officers have time to prepare those words. But my reasoning for why we should actually refuse this and support a refusal at VCAT is around a number of key areas. In the report, we talk about does it support neighbourhood character. The report talks about neighbourhood character in a fashion of, well, it's under residential growth zone, so yes, it ticks that box. In reality, for me, neighbourhood character goes beyond that. You need to look left, you need to look right and see what other type of development is in that area. There are no triple-storey developments of this scale and size in that area. This is a significant overdevelopment that is completely out of character with the fabric of Fawkner. Now, I understand we want growth in that area, I understand we want development in that area, but this is a 583 square metre block, a traditional block of moorland. I mean, we're talking about, yes, maybe you can squeeze 3. Hell, it's right near Bonwick Street. They could probably get away with 4. But 5, crammed in the way it is crammed in, is a significant overdevelopment. And because of that, it is completely out of neighbourhood character. Car parking is a significant issue. We're introducing at minimum 5 cars into this block. And as we know, when you're building a triple-storey unit, there's probably a second car, which each of those units has been highlighted. There's parking across the road at Bonwick Street Shops, which is already overly congested. We want that road saved for buses, not cars to be parking on those roads. We want that road in our strategic MITS plan to be dedicated for cyclists. We're about to introduce cycling paths on Dukes Road. Now we're going to have cars parked along that road. It's going to become more dangerous for cyclists. We talk about overlooking at a triple-storey level. It really starts pushing the boundaries for the adjoining properties. We talk about the environmental standards that we're really having to condition into this report. But for me, the one that really sticks out is when the representative of the developer says, well, it's not realistic to have these units built for people with mobility issues. I mean, that's really poor form. We're conditioning the report to be high for environmental standards. Why not condition it to be high for mobility standards? This is right next to Bonwick Street. This is right next to Fawkner Leisure Centre. This is right next to Fawkner Library. This is right next to a transport hub. This is perfect spot for people with mobility issues. And if we're serious about taking action to help people with mobility issues, then we should actually enforce developers to have and build buildings with mobility design integration. So just in summary, I will be moving an alternative because I don't have the words prepared, and if councillors will support that, I'll ask you to table the report so we can prepare those words and then bring it back and move that alternative at that time. If it gets voted down.
Right. But you're not proposing an amendment to condition visitable?
It's a foreshadowing.
To address that? Or to refuse it altogether?
To refuse it, yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Kavanagh.
Just to make a note that I'll be abstaining in this vote because I wasn't here for the objectors and the applicants' presentations. And I apologise for my lateness, but that's why I'll be abstaining from the vote on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh.
I'll probably need to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Yildiz. So, I guess, Councillor Martin?
Just want
would
to
like
close,
to,
if
yep,
that's
for
okay.
sure.
So, thank you again to the residents for coming. I do know how daunting it is coming and talking to a group of councillors. Many of you probably haven't met us before and aren't aware how hard we do work on planning in this city. It is a huge job, planning in particular. I think really what this comes down to is the fact that we have to support this application because we have no grounds for refusal. The reason why my fellow councillors don't have a foreshadowed motion for refusal is because we have no grounds to refuse it on. All of the elements of the scheme in which we would love to be mandatory, we're talking heights, we're talking ESD, we're talking accessibility, these things aren't mandatory in this zone. And unfortunately, neighbourhood character, it doesn't apply here because we've already got 2 other applications within close proximity that are the exact same. And the nature of it is that those 20 or so homes within that residential growth zone will likely all end up looking very much like this unless we're able to change elements of our planning scheme. So I do urge my fellow councillors to support the motion before us and commit to making some of the optional things in the planning scheme mandatory to future-proof development of this nature.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I'll put the item to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. So I'll now move to the officer to outline the next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So council has just decided to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit for the proposal at 116 Dukes Road, and that's subject to the conditions contained in the amended recommendation. So following the issue of the notice of decision, both the applicant and objector parties will have 28 days to review council's decision at the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. In the event that no appeal is lodged, a planning permit will be issued. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item that we'll see this evening is DCF 5119, 21 to 25 Northumberland Road, Pascoe Vale. Planning permit MPS 2018-471. And I'll move to the officers to present the report.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. So, as you said, the item on the agenda next is 21 to 25 Northumberland Road in Pascoe Vale. The site is within, pardon me, the Pascoe Vale Local Activity Centre. On the screen there, it's in a blue colour. It's close to the eastern end of the activity centre. This is an application that has a little history that goes back earlier this year when Council decided to, or resolved to make its submission at VCAT, one of refusal of a proposal which was also an apartment development on this site. However, since that time there's been a VCAT process where there's been a number of compulsory conferences, the first one being in February of this year where the applicant foreshadowed changes to the proposal and intended to circulate changes to their proposal. So then in April there was a set of amended plans that were sent around on a without prejudice basis, and then a second compulsory conference which then led to further changes to the plans and a third compulsory conference in May. So the plans that we'll be looking at this evening were received by Council on the 20th of May. And at that third compulsory conference, all of the parties agreed in principle to the proposal, subject to some further changes, and coming back to council for its consent. This is a 3D representation of the original proposal, just to remind you of what was originally proposed on this site. The changes that have been made would result in something. This is obviously a 3D representation of the proposal at the southern end of Northumberland Road, looking towards the site of a 4-storey apartment building, and then another representation looking at the site from the front. This is a layout, a typical layout of the apartments, one of the floor levels, which shows you the layout with an internal courtyard in the centre of the site and setbacks from boundaries. So in summary, the changes from what was originally considered by council to what is now being considered in the without prejudice plans is a change from 73 apartments to 63, a change from 5 levels above natural ground level to 4 levels above natural ground level, 106 car parking spaces in car stackers to 82 car parking spaces with no car stackers. Vehicles were originally to be originally to access the basement levels via a lift. The proposal now has a traditional ramp arrangement to get access to the basements. You can see also the best score and the ESD credentials have been increased with a tripling of the solar proposed on the site, as well as an increase in the best score, and also an increase in the number of apartments that would meet the livable housing silver level standard of livable housing guidelines. Originally, during public notice, council received 76 objections to that original proposal, and the issues that were raised were non-compliance with the DDO 24, non-compliance with clause 58 of the Better Apartment Design Standards, concerns about overdevelopment and impact on character, lack of car parking spaces for visitors, lack of landscaping, traffic and safety concerns, and overlooking. When the VCAT appeal was lodged, 11 of those objectors joined as parties to the appeal. If council tonight decides to adopt the terms of settlement that were reached by residents and council officers at the compulsory conference, then there would be further public notice that would take place of any plans that are substituted, so that the plans that I've shown you now would be re-advertised in July. So all of the original objectors would have an opportunity to see those changed plans. So some of the key considerations of the amended or the without prejudice plans, the design response and material selection is now of what officers would say is a high standard. Subject to conditions, the extended built form, including the height and setbacks, would be consistent with the built form outcome sought by the DDO. And also subject to conditions that no less than 50% of the apartments would comply with the accessibility requirements of clause 55 or the Better Apartment Design Standards, and 70% would comply with the silver level standard of the Livable Housing Design Guidelines. The internal amenity of future residents would be appropriate, and the external impacts to surrounding properties would be appropriate, would be protected as well. So the officer recommendation is to endorse the terms of settlement reached by parties at the last compulsory conference, and to authorise officers to notify VCAT that it consents to the plans and the terms of settlements agreed at that compulsory conference, and also to authorise officers to notify VCAT and all parties that it consents, subject to some additional changes which are included in the recommendation B of the agenda this evening, which would further improve the internal amenity of dwellings and clarify detail of privacy screening with balconies on the northern side of the building. So the key conditions include a reduction in the height to ensure it's no more than 4 storeys above natural ground level, 13 and 13.5 metres, retention of the architect throughout construction, and submission of an access report to confirm that 70% livable housing standard is met, as well as an ESD report to confirm best practice daylight and 62% cross ventilation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objectors or submitters who wish to speak to this application? Oh.
I'm for the applicant, but...
Yep, we'll hear from the objectors. Yep. Are there any objectors here? Okay, so I guess we'll hear from you as the applicant then. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Jamie Govenlock and I'm a town planner at Urbis. Here for the applicant, and the business address of where I work is level 12, 120 Collins Street in the city. First of all, I wanted to thank all the planning officers and also the objectors for being involved in this process. It's a rare opportunity in a planning forum where objectors, planners and applicants can actually all work together. It's been a long and arduous process through a VCAT with the various compulsory conference hearings and so forth. There's been some absolute positives that have come out of that, so I'd like to thank the planning officers and objectors for being involved. Certainly there's been some significant changes. The officers have already been through that with you. I think the game changer was really changing architects, to be perfectly honest with you. Certainly a reputable architect that came up through the compulsory conference process seemed like a no-brainer. I think it was an absolute perfect idea for the site. So that certainly changed things up. There's also a willingness by the applicants, the objectors, and also the council officers to work together to get this thing over the line. In terms of the significant changes, they've already been outlined, but certainly there's the pluses with the application. There's a significant improvement in the architectural quality with the new architect, compliance with the DDO height control, and also the objectives in relation to setbacks and overall heights and so forth. Improved ESD outcomes, improved streetscape character and character overall, noting the area is part of a sort of a wider activity centre where this sort of development is encouraged in terms of the residential growth zone. There's better car parking access, so it's not by lifts anymore, it's straight down a ramp. You've got far better internal apartment amenity, particularly being BADS compliant, much better interfaces with residential properties through landscaping, setbacks and privacy screens and so forth. There's also been, has been outlined tonight, additional communal open space and improvements in mobility and communal and accessibility for future residents. We understand the plans have also been sent back through the council process to Council's Urban Design Unit, ESD Unit and Traffic Engineer, all of which have come back and basically said that we're on the right path. There's a number of conditions that are in the council officer's report, all of those conditions that the applicant is happy to abide by and further work with the council in relation to achieving those various outcomes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jamie. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Martin.
Thank you for coming. I just have one question in regards to a number of other applications across our city that have this number of dwellings, usually offer some form of community benefit. I know some applications have been offering a portion of the apartments for affordable housing. I'm just wondering whether or not the applicant would be amenable to offering a portion, a number of apartments through a Section 173 to affordable housing?
It's probably not something that we would be prepared to offer on the basis that we feel we've got a range of housing opportunities within there for a number of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in there. We're working very hard from the ESD and mobility point of view as well to sort of not just flop over the line in terms of, just sort of trying to get a plan, but actually sort of raising the bar a little bit in terms of some of those things. So there's been a number of changes made to the plans, there's been a number of improvements. Those things, I know it's not a relevant consideration, but they certainly cost money. The applicant's prepared to work with the council so we get this further working to do all these things to development. I think that's probably something that probably wouldn't be on the table for us at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
To be frank with you.
No, thank you for your answer.
Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I noticed that you're running gas through this building when we're getting some applications through here that are skipping this technology because of the costs and the rollout, and in fact that some of them are looking to the future so that we're actually getting better outcomes for people in the long term and their economic viability of running the places. So I'm just curious, did you consider at all the prospect of going all electric rather than going for an expensive way of providing for energy and so on. No, it seems to only be with hot water. So I'm just wondering whether you're running gas for stoves and things as well.
Well, there's a number of detailed planning permit conditions. We've got a sort of the 6.5 negative rating and so forth, but basically condition 8 outlines a number of particular ESD requirements to be achieved by anyone committed. They're not ones that, just to flop over the line. So we are trying to raise the bar on this, but we aren't. But that's something that wasn't really considered. I don't think in great detail.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Can I just confirm that if this is passed, it goes out for public notice again, and objectors can then go through the process that they have done? Sorry, I don't know why I'm from TV. Sorry. In terms of objecting, just
That's right. So the plans would be formally advertised through the VCAT process, and any additional parties who wanted to be joined at that point could join as a party, and there would be a further compulsory conference to talk about their concerns.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? No, I'll ask. Sorry, you can have a seat, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask, please, for a motion. Councillor Riley.
I'll move the motion as put by the officers.
And a seconder? Okay, well, I'm happy to second. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak to the application?
Yes, look, this is far improved from what it was. It's still, again, it just barely meets what I would call acceptable, unfortunately, in this system. We're not seeking excellence, but we are forced under this planning scheme to seek acceptable outcomes. And you can judge by my questions that I don't necessarily think that what is acceptable now will actually be acceptable in a year or two's time, because I think having declared a climate emergency, we need to actually step up our standards so that we get better outcomes for our people living in these apartments. Look, it was a dreadful application we saw earlier this year. This is much better. And I think with the conditions that have been outlined tonight, I won't go through them all. It sort of barely meets what I call the acceptable measure under our planning scheme. I'm pleased it's got NABERS ratings of 6.5. We're not having a car stacker and so on. There are lots of livable or accessible properties in this design, and there won't be queuing out onto the street as people trying to get in and out of their car parks. So I think it's moved up a notch. I think it could have, I'd like to see us getting better outcomes, but I can't require, I'm not sure that I can add anything or condition to this that would require that. Although there may be an amendment, I'm not sure if there is an amendment, but something like that might actually improve it slightly. So at this stage, I'm prepared to do that in terms of moving this because I think the residents have come this far and they've put a lot of effort into it. And in a way, I'd like to see that effort bear some fruit rather than further disputation and lengthy delays, mainly on the side of the residents who have concerns around this.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. I just want to refer to the phrase that you used a couple of times about flopping over the line, because that just is a great metaphor, great analogy. And the previous iteration of this particular application flopped into a trench just before the line, and the line was the road. And so I commend the fact that you have a new architect. I think that's very fortunate. I have great respect for the 176 objectors that were involved in coming to this outcome. And unfortunately, this is a lot of times how things are resolved in the city, is that the residents rise up and use their voices. And so I commend those people who've been involved in that process. And it is for that reason that I'm okay about seconding the application, because I believe that those people are engaged and will respond to what is involved in the application. I think there's probably a missed opportunity to go to solar hot water if only the gas is being used for the hot water, then potentially there is an opportunity, and hopefully one day soon we will see more buildings without gas at all. I know that many people are transitioning out of gas, and that's a good thing. But I'm looking forward to seeing what the residents make of it, and I was a bit concerned about rejecting it because I can't imagine what it could potentially go back to. So, yeah, that's probably all I need to say. And are there any councillors who would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Kavanagh?
I have a slight amendment that I'd like to make.
Sure.
I'd just like to see if this amendment is acceptable to the mover and seconder, and that is to add into Part B an additional amendment that states amend Condition 9 by inserting 9L to read, IL, I can't remember which one it is, details of how different waste streams will be managed, including green waste, organic waste, and commingled waste, and the storage area required for each of these streams. Just wanted to insert that.
Yep, that's Councillor Riley?
Yes.
Yep. Were there 2 words you needed removed at point 8 as well, such as? Did that get addressed?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so did you want to add that as part of your amendment? See just there where it says such as?
Yeah, I'm happy to also have those amendment deleted as well.
Those 2 words deleted?
Yep.
And
just,
is that?
I just want to just confirm with the officers that that's
Yep.
should be acceptable.
Yep.
There's no issues there. Yep, I'm happy with
That's
that as well.
acceptable.
Yeah, just that I remember we talked about it at the briefing, so I just wanted to make sure that you included that. And that's acceptable to me as well, so that can be incorporated. And Councillor Kavanagh, I believe you wanted to speak against?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and I can understand why Councillor Riley and the Mayor are supporting the application, and I do agree that it's a vast improvement on the one that came before us. But there's a few things that I want to say. Number one, the only reason why there's any improvement at all is because of the refusals of both the council officers and then at the council meeting, or the PAR meeting. So let's have a look what we're talking about here. We're still talking about 63 apartments on 3 blocks of land. Yes, it's in a growth zone, but it's not in activity zone like Sydney Road and Bell Street. We're talking 23 apartments on each of the 3 residential blocks. We're talking an area of 2,391 square metres and 63 apartments. On one level, that would be 37 metres per apartment. We're talking about a massive development in Northumberland Road. And yes, the zoning is growth zone. I'm also conscious, and the point was made by the Mayor, of what we risk in that we could go back to where we were before, and I accept that. I also accept that the 11 objectors who have made the effort to go through the process have also consented. I accept that. And I also accept that the other 65 will be notified. But I think part of the reason why the other 65, if you like, dropped off the process, probably 2 reasons. Number one, the process is very onerous on residents, and I congratulate the 11 that continued all the way along. But number 2, because of the refusal by council, I think some residents would accept that council would then act on their behalf throughout the entire process. And yes, they will be notified. But I can't get over the fact that for me, although it's an improvement on what we saw originally, which I think at the time I classified as the easiest decision we've ever had to make in council with the refusal, I understand it's an improvement, I do, but I still come back to the fact that it's 63 apartments on a block of land, a residential area of 2,391 square metres. And so I foreshadow that if the motion is unsuccessful, I'll be moving a resolution that we do not consent to the adjusted plans, and at that point I'll give my reasons at that point if that is the case of what goes ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Are there any councillors that would like to speak in favour of this amended motion? Okay, so I guess I'll put that to the vote. Sorry, in a moment.
I'm just, there's just a slight, apologies.
That's okay.
Just a slight grammatical fixing up of that condition 8. Just because I want to make sure that it makes sense to people who are reading it. I think it would be better if the sentence, go up to there. Yeah, so where it says specific details demonstrating and confirming the ESD measures have been implemented must be included. If it was to read specific details demonstrating and confirming the following ESD measures have been implemented, and delete the must be included.
Specific details demonstrating the following ESD measures have been implemented.
The amendment makes it much better.
Just to make it make a little bit more sense.
Yeah. Specific details demonstrating the following ESD measures have
And
been
delete must be
implemented, full
included.
stop.
Yep.
And then just if you can scroll down a little bit, because then the next bit is what they are. The following ESD, and then these are the following ESD measures. Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to check if officers are ready for me to put this to the vote. I think we have the words together. Yeah, good. So what we've done there is just, rather than saying by deleting those words, we've changed the sentence. So amending condition 8 to read as follows, which is that the report must be to the satisfaction, etc. And then what will follow after the sentence, specific details demonstrating the following ESD measures, is what those following ESD measures are. And then I think I can put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? So this is carried on the casting vote, so an article for this week's leader. Would you like a division?
Yes, please.
Right. So all those in favour? Councillors Martin, Dorney, Riley and Abood. Against? Councillor Yildiz, Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor O'Farnley and Councillor Bolton. So I now move to the officers to outline what will happen next.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. So Council has now resolved to endorse the terms of settlement that were agreed to by parties at the previous compulsory conference, including the Part D of the recommendation, which will include additional items that will need to be circulated amongst the parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll now move on to DCF 5219, number 2 Elm Grove, Brunswick East, planning permit MPS 2017-245, and I'll move to the officers to present the report.
Thank you. So this is an application at 2 Elm Grove, Brunswick East. It's for an 8-storey building with a reduction of the statutory car parking requirement, located within the East Brunswick Village Development Plan area. So the site is within a commercial 1 zone, and it's affected by a number of overlays, which include most notably the development plan overlay, as mentioned. The approved development plan sets out the built form requirements for the site and the surrounding area, which includes also includes vehicle and pedestrian access, public realm works, among a number of other things. Any development within the development plan area must be generally in accordance with the development plan. The proposal is shown, a 3D rendering of the proposal is shown on screen. It is for an 8-storey building, which is, I guess, predominantly 6 stories, but it also includes a mezzanine level for storage and a roof deck associated with it. There are 20 dwellings, a mix of 3 and 2 bedroom. There is a 55 square metre retail space. Vehicle access is from Elm Grove, which is the only lawful access point. 22 car parking spaces are provided, 28 bicycle parking spaces, and it's a contemporary building with a mix of brick and render. Although the application is formally exempt from public notification requirements, one objection has been received and council is obliged to consider that objection. However, the objector would not have a right of review at VCAT. The key issue raised by the objector was the impact of the development on a substation located within the Elm Grove Road Reserve, which will require demolition as a consequence of the development. Neither the subject site nor the substation are affected by heritage overlay, and the development plan implies removal of the substation. And the image on screen just shows what that substation looks like. City Development is recommending that a planning permit be issued for the proposal. That's on the basis that it is generally in accordance with the development plan. And some of the key conditions of the recommendation include modifications to address internal amenity, including an increase to the light port at the 5th story. And in relation to the substation, it requires the removal of the substation prior to the commencement of the development, and then public realm works to reinstate the road reserve and footpath, as well as provide bicycle parking and a street tree. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objectors or submitters who would like to speak? Yep. You can work out who's going to go first. Sure.
Thanks, councillors, for the opportunity. It's disappointing to have to be back here again arguing the case for protecting a significant piece of Brunswick's heritage from avoidable destruction. But thank you for your resolution in the March meeting regarding requesting the applicant to adjust plans to avoid conflicting with the existing building.
Sorry, can we just have your name for the
sorry,
gallery and the record?
Duncan. I was the objector in this case. Officers were alerted to the clash between this proposed development and the abutting substation in June 2017 and undertook to assess its heritage value, excuse me, giving an assurance that it would be protected if its significance was confirmed. The applicant was advised of this potential clash. A specialist heritage report was undertaken by council, and that confirmed that, quote, the electrical substation located at Elm Grove, Brunswick is of historic significance, end of quote, and that, quote, it was recommended for inclusion in the schedule to the heritage overlay of the Moreland Planning Scheme as an individually significant place. Despite being included within the proposed amendment C174, the heritage amendment that proceeded through council late last year, early this year, it was included in the amendment that was resolved by council late in 2017, but this item was removed from that amendment prior to exhibition without any notification. The basis for this removal and for the support of this application is an assumption which has since been proven unsound, that the EBV, the East Brunswick Village Development Plan, had endorsed the demolition of this building. As the EBV Development Plan does not cover this land, it cannot impose any obligation or implicit commitment. Even if the plan did apply, the incidental reference to this substation is in the context of electricity supply and infrastructure, not heritage, which was apparently overlooked. Notably, tonight's officer report on this application carefully states that the approved development plan contemplates the removal of the substation, and this contrasts to words like endorsed or approved as have previously been used. There's no evidence that come to light of any binding commitments or obligations given on behalf of council to support the demolition that have emerged either from the applicant or the officers during the course of this since it was raised again in March. In short, council has no obligation at this point in time no obligation to support an outcome that requires demolition. However, tonight's recommended permit would not only create a commitment but would require demolition, which is quite extraordinary. Council appears to be the default owner of this building. It's the manager of the land, it constructed the building, and City Power, who currently occupy it with electrical equipment, advised that the building will revert to council once the equipment is decommissioned. No one else owns it. Council's the default owner of the building. Heritage policies, state heritage policies in the Moreland Planning Scheme talk about protecting places with significant heritage values, promoting development that minimises detrimental impacts on the built environment, encouraging appropriate development that respects places identified heritage values, and retaining elements that are important to a heritage place. These objectives apply to planning for heritage generally, not only for places with heritage overlay. While the site's not currently covered by a heritage overlay or interim control, due to the assumptions that were taken during the course of the heritage amendment about the EBV plan applying. Moreland's heritage policies encourage conservation of all heritage places, protecting Moreland's heritage places from demolition and respecting the statements of significance, including the one that has been prepared at Council's expense for this property.
Sorry, Rod, we've gone well over time, so...
Sorry, I've just
need you to...
my summary.
Yeah,
Then.
we've received a lot of information.
Tonight, councillors have a choice between reconciling the past and future or endorsing avoidable destruction of a known asset. Minor refinements to the proposal can easily reconcile a proposal that clashes with an established neighbour. I'm suggesting councillors have a decision that's reasonable, responsible and prudent. Reasonable to make modest changes to avoid conflict with existing heritage building. Responsible in respecting council and planning scheme policies for significant buildings, given council's also the owner of the building effectively. And prudent in balancing development and avoiding diminishing Brunswick's heritage.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other objectives? Oh, yeah. I always nearly say Councillor Dolby. Councillor Dolby.
Nick Dolby, Credit West Brunswick. The development overall, I have no objections to the development overall. I'm talking about the substation. Substations, yes, electricity, what we're bought into a wind farm in northern Victoria. I feel actually a bit like Don Quixote, I'm tilting at a windmill. That this seems to be a fait accompli. And yet this substation, which represents part of Brunswick's heritage, not industrial heritage, Brunswick City Council heritage. This was built by Brunswick City Council's electricity supply department. The plans of these substations throughout Brunswick, almost every other one, as far as I know, every other one that still stands has a strong heritage protection on it, because they were a beautiful example of a little building that you could play around with a bit. So you'll notice it's got the little aerating things up the top and so on. All these little amendments that you couldn't do to office buildings because you had to make it boring, but this, you could make it a little bit interesting. This sits there, and it will sit there beautifully in contrast with the modernist architecture around it in a cul-de-sac street. And yet it seems to be assumed that we're going to knock it over. The plans that have been submitted are being submitted on the grounds that it's going to be knocked over. I say it should be retained. We should support its retention as part of our recognition not only of its heritage value, but of the contribution that Brunswick City Council Electricity Supply Department did for social justice in addressing electricity prices and bills for low-income earners, and in their innovative and premier attempt to get renewable energy into the electricity market before they were then subsumed into the wider electricity providers. So this particular substation is important for those reasons. It's a beautiful building. These plans should in fact be modified to recognise its continued existence, and everything that Rod said, absolutely 100% he said.
Thank you. Are there any other objectors? Are there any other, is there an applicant or representative of the applicant who wishes to speak? Come forward.
Madam Chair, my name is Damien Lochner, and I presented to Council at the meeting on the 13th of March regarding Amendment C174 when the substation issue was discussed. But before I just turn to that, I'd just like to say that the officer report that has been prepared, we're certainly in concurrence. There are several conditions that require some changes, which would necessitate the removal of a couple of bedrooms. We have no issue with those changes. Matters of design, accessibility, ESD have been supported and are on a firm footing as outlined in the officer report. So I'll turn to the matter of the substation. The substation has been ongoing for about a year and a half, since early last year when we were notified of looking at it, I guess, as a potential heritage issue. On behalf of my client, the heritage report was prepared by John Biggs, which was furnished to Council, which did not support its retention. Subsequently, it was not included in Amendment C174, and the position has been that it is not of heritage significance, which is distinct from an issue of EBV and the development plan and the like. But what I would say on the development plan is that the development plan does include 2 Elm Grove, and because Elm Grove fronts the site, then that too is in the EBV development plan as well. I guess as far as the substation goes and the position now is concerned, I think the officer report sums up the position quite well, in that it notes the work that has been done, it notes that it is not deemed to be of heritage significance, and it notes that the 2 Elm Grove is appropriate, and demolition of the substation again as well would be appropriate. What I would say is that there are a number of substations in the municipality that do have heritage significance and that shall be retained. This is just not one of those substations. The applicant would agree to I guess, inclusion of bricks to form part of the building, and that's been discussed with officers. So, in terms of, I guess, bringing some heritage by that means, or by some sort of photo imagery or the like, we're happy to look at those sorts of options. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
For, actually, not for the applicant, sorry, but for one of the objectors and for a council officer.
Sure.
Got questions for the applicant? No?
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask a question of Rod, the first objector, then I've got a couple of questions for the council officer. There seems to be some issue about whether or not there was public consultation about the demolition of the substation during consultation over either the development plan overlay or the development plan. I was just wondering what your understanding of that is.
The development plan does not extend to the Elm Grove Street, and it's therefore not covered by the EBV development plan. So the content of that plan might be talked about, has been talked about, and I think that's where an assumption has got into council officer expectations, but there is actually, that cannot apply to land that's outside the area of that plan. So whether or not there was consultation, I've attempted to be involved in consultation, not been aware of much, if any, but the heritage value of this building, I did nominate it for the Heritage Gap Study back in 2016, and it was assessed, and by the way, the applicant's heritage consultant did not dispute that it was of heritage significance. They just had a suggestion that it could be recorded and demolished rather than retained, but there was no disputing the significance of the substation despite the applicant's misunderstanding.
Thank you very much. So a question for the officer. I'm wondering if you're aware of what was raised by the objector before about City Power assuming that this will revert to council ownership at some point, because that seems in contradiction to the report. Is that something we've investigated, that they would assume this will revert to council ownership? And I understand council built this substation, is that correct?
Councillor Bolton.
Oh, sorry. Is it? Sorry. Ooh, wrong officer.
It's okay.
In terms of the ownership question, I confirm that the substation building isn't in council ownership. It's not on our asset register, and the provisions of the Road Management Act govern that any infrastructure like that above a road that doesn't form part of the road itself is in the ownership of the authority that has the responsibility for that infrastructure, so not council. And I can't confirm who built the building. Sorry.
Just the follow on is the understanding from the objector is that City Power, I gather, had some contact with City Power, who's indicated that this will revert to council ownership once those things are built. Is that,
It may be the case where a substation building is located on council-owned land, like a reserve, and in that instance, it is council-owned land and there's a lease in place with the servicing authority. So in that instance, if the servicing authority no longer needed to use the building, it's in that instance that the lease would end and the ownership would just revert to council. But it's very different for roads where the Road Management Act kicks in essentially.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Dorney, did you have a question for Damien? Yeah, sorry, Damien.
Sorry. There was just a question regarding the solar capacity on the rooftop that's currently at 5 kilowatts. I was just wondering, is there any extra room for any more solar, or can you just talk about kind of how you came to the decision of the 5 kilowatts for the number? Yeah.
There is a roof terrace. I need to re-familiarise myself with the HV report firstly, but there is a roof terrace taking up part of the space, and the solar panels are to the other side. If there is capacity, and I don't think that there's terribly much capacity for an increase in the panels because of that, but happy to look at it.
Right, thank you.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Riley?
Probably a question for the officers, just to clarify, if it was to be, retained on the public roadway and kept under some structure, I'm not sure what the structure would be, who would be responsible for the clean-up of the site? Because presumably there's be some industrial waste issues and contamination issues and detoxing that would need to happen. Who would be responsible for those costs if it was to be maintained? Is that dependent on who's going to own it, does it?
Typically, and in the officer recommendation, there is a requirement for clean-up of the land itself, and that sits with the permit holder in this instance.
2 Elms Grove.
Yes.
So can we just clarify, if the council votes to retain the substation, who would be responsible for that aspect of it? So it wouldn't, if it's gone, then cleaning up the site is the responsibility of the applicant. But if it stays there and gets turned into a coffee shop, which is the proposal that's been put forward, or something, to make it fit for use, who would be responsible for cleaning it up and who would own it?
So that's an interesting question, because I guess technically under the Road Management Act it remains the property of the servicing authority.
But can we condition them to retain it on our land?
From a planning point of view, there's no nexus between the decision that's being made on the planning application and the retention of the substation.
Yeah, because until now it's, yeah, okay.
So the decision that's being made is in relation to the subject site.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions from councillors?
Sorry, Chair, just wanted to make sure I'm clear on that. So the objectors, one of the things they kind of noted was they're not against the development, but they would like it conditioned to retain the substation. Are you saying we can't condition that, or you're saying it's not relevant to this application?
It's outside of the land which is the subject of the application.
Okay.
So I don't believe we can condition it to be retained.
I see, it's owned by a different property owner, is that what you're saying?
It's in the ownership and in the responsibility of the servicing authority.
Which is sitting
And so it's like any piece of public infrastructure, like a light pole, it's in their ownership and they have responsibility for it. So I don't believe we can include permit conditions. The application relates to the land adjacent to the road.
Right, I think Councillor Bolton has it.
Yeah, I've got another question. Well, if we can't condition it to keep it, how can we condition it be demolished? Like, that seems like a total contradiction.
So the condition that's included in the recommendation is a condition for a public works plan, like any permit application where works need to occur to facilitate the development, so whether that be a new crossover or the shifting or modification of some existing infrastructure, that's what's been required in this instance. It's not necessary to be retained to facilitate the development.
Thank you. So, are there any further questions?
Just one for the officer, just about heritage significance, and just if you can just outline what the significance is, and if we've had any legal advice around that.
So, as I understand it, there was an assessment of the significance, the heritage significance of the building. But what ensued following that assessment was some legal advice that advised that because there'd been a history of approvals around the development plan that had assumed removal of that substation, that it was not appropriate to continue to include it in the heritage overlay for that reason. And that's why it wasn't presented as part of the amendment that was put to council earlier this year.
Okay. I guess I need to ask if I could please have a motion regarding this item from councillors.
Yeah,
I've got an amendment.
I'll move the officer recommendation.
Yep. And a seconder for councillor Riley.
I'd like to propose a slight, an additional point.
So what I might do is I might get a
sorry.
seconder, and then I think we've got a couple of amendments.
Okay.
So we might do it that
Yeah,
way.
I'll second.
Okay, so councillor, well, I saw councillor Riley, but
Oh, did you? No, that's it's fine. Council, isn't it?
yeah. Councillor Riley, sorry.
Councillor Martin.
I always do that.
Yes.
I do know your name.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me, councillor Martin. We've known each other for years. Okay, councillor Riley. So, would you like to speak to it before you hear the proposed amendments?
Oh, no, I'm more than happy to hear the amendment.
Okay, so councillor Bolton, would you like to put forward your amendment first?
Yes, so my amendment, which I circulated earlier, is to delete condition 3, and condition 3 relates to a requirement to demolish the substation, and to insert a new point K, or 1K, in condition 1, which states alterations to the ground floor layout and any consequential changes to reconcile the proposed development with retention of the existing electricity substation building on the Elm Grove Road Reserve and interface of the development with the existing structure in a manner consistent with heritage conservation and interpretation best practice.
So can I just ask a question? Because I'm a bit confused about who would be responsible for the financial cost of that particular additional point K? Like, if it's outside the application site.
Why I've moved it?
No, it's just a question about how that works, how that point works. So, could we have some officer advice? So the proposal is alterations to the ground floor layout and any consequential changes to reconcile the proposed development with retention to the existing, etc., and the interface. So, are you suggesting that's inside the site that this application is addressing? Inside that red, there's a red box around this application site. So you're talking about those alterations to be made inside that red box.
Well, I'm talking about the fact that the substation shouldn't be required to be demolished. I think there are enough question marks over the public consultation about that to indicate that it should be retained, because it seems that the heritage considerations of not including it in the heritage amendment are based on assuming that there's been public consultation, and there's some disputation about that. And so I think the process has been really problematic with this. And yeah, anyway, I'm starting to speak to the amendment. I think.
Okay, so I'll just find out if the amendment is acceptable to councillors Riley and Martin.
No.
So we need to find you a seconder. Councillor Yildiz, are you following? Would you like to second Councillor Bolton's proposed amendment? Or Councillor Farnley? I think Councillor Dorney has her own amendment to put forward. No? So that lapses for want of a seconder. Councillor Dorney, can we hear your proposed amendment?
Yes, I'll just give officers a moment to pull up point that's not, or point, there's a K, L and M addition to number 1. Is that, there we go. Yeah. Oh, KL, yeah, KL and M, yeah. So the ground floor western facade to Elm Grove, including recycled bricks from the substation building. The brick shall replace the charcoal textured rendered marking on the western elevation as TR1. The addition of brick plinth to the base of the shop front window on the western facade to Elm Grove. The plinth shall be constructed of recycled bricks from the substation. A photo imagery or etching of the substation on the northern facade or adjoining the pedestrian access way or alternative suitable location. And I'd just like to add to that, including reference to the history of the site. I'm aware of Nick Dolby's comments about the historicness of, Brunswick City Council as an energy provider, as well as moving to renewable energy and kind of just something to reference the story and the history of the site to the best we can, whether we can do some community consultation around that.
So just before you go on, I think we can nut out what reference to the history of the site might look like. I'll just find out if that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so those 3 points have been incorporated into the motion, which was the officer recommendation, and these form an amendment to the officer's recommendation. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, yes. In speaking to the motion, most of my comments will be actually not so much about Elm Grove, but rather some of the issues relating to the heritage value and otherwise of the substation. So there's been some different claims made tonight about the heritage value and the assessment of that, and it seems pretty clear that there was some reference to its significance in a report, and then it wasn't recommended to be included in the amendment for the heritage overlay. Timing is everything, so there's a couple of things. Timing is very important in this. Had this issue, and I really want to thank people who've raised this, namely Rod Duncan for all his work and advocacy on this, and I've listened to Rod and read everything Rod sent and done so again. So it's not an easy matter to talk on this because I understand how passionate he is about this. So had this issue been dealt with earlier in the process, I think the concerns around community consultation and the value of this site and this building would have been dealt with in a much more productive way. I think the timing of this is causing some considerable problems. We've had some meetings with officers and Mr Duncan and the proponents to try and explore ways through including this building into the future, but that wasn't agreed to. With regard to the heritage value, this is something that has been clearly noted by the officers. The council doesn't take ownership or management of the responsibility for such a building when the state authority no longer has need for it, especially when it's on a roadway, unlike a substation that would be in a local park, for example, which would revert to our management. And council was also forced, it's important to note that we were forced to sell the substation under the Kennett government reforms a couple of decades ago. And so, you know, had that not happened, we might be in a different situation as well. With regard to public interest, I just want to speak to the fact that I have to weigh this up as for our public interest, and I've had some submissions from some residents today and yesterday, or a couple of people, so not large numbers, but not insignificant, and I thank them for making those requests to give some consideration to this. So it's been a very vexed issue for me. I think if I was looking at this in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and I'm looking back at it, if we go back to the photo where the front facade is and there's a white car there, that's where the substation is at the moment, or it's just sort of halfway through the car. I'm just thinking, are residents and members of Moreland going to walk past this and go, wow, this is a great thing having this red brick thing here, and whether it's a cafe or a toy library or whatever it would be, it hasn't been designed to be incorporated, and this is the problem I have about the timing issue. Had it been incorporated earlier and included, we could have designed it to be much more integrated into the plans. As it stands, it's going to be this block of red brick block on the street, on a public street, which is meant to be, under the designs, meant to be for walking and pedestrians and bike access, etc. So just in finishing, I'm looking at the amenity outcomes of this and the livability outcomes, and for all of the concerns around the significance of this, I think there is some significance, but whether I have to weigh this up, is it so significant that we have to keep it at such a cost to end up with it sort of being stuck in the middle of a roadway? And that's where I fall down on this side. It's been a very difficult decision, but it's not one I relish.
Just before we go on, I just need to double check, Councillor Dorney, with point 3, the bricks are to be retained for recycling and reuse within the proposed building facade. Those words were put there as a proposed amendment. Do we leave those words in there as well? So basically the officer report in the agenda read up to at the cost of the developer, full stop. So those words, the bricks are to be retained for recycling and reuse within the, that needs to be added by you as part of the amendment that you added. It's just for the sake of process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Be happy. Yep.
okay, good. And mover and seconder happy to incorporate.
Happy to incorporate that.
Okay, so Councillor Martin, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, thank you.
Any speakers against? Councillor Bolton.
I'd like to. I think the issue of this substation does indicate some real problems with how this whole process has worked. I mean, yes, you're right, Councillor Riley, that would have been good if this had been raised earlier, but the residents, the particular residents who've been contacting councillors over the last few days, the sorts of residents who really follow a lot of what's happening with development and heritage in the city. So they're not like disinterested observers who just occasionally think about these things. And they were unaware until 2017 that there was a proposal to demolish this. And it seems that some of the confusion about this whole thing is, from council's perspective, there was some assumption there was community consultation around the development plan overlay and development plan process. But it seems from the residents' point of view that there was no reference or minimal reference or no reference in the development plan overlay consultation about the demolition of the substation, and that only happened during the development plan where there was no public consultation. So it seems that the public has been in the dark about the demolition of the substation. So that's why it only came to council's attention in 2017. And so then it seems like a really faulty process that it was recognised by the heritage consultants as being a site of significance, but it was dropped from council's heritage amendment on the basis that there'd been a history of approvals as a result of public consultation around demolition of the substation. So the whole process is problematic in my view, and so I can't vote on this or vote for this amendment, this application.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any councillors in favour of the motion?
Yeah, just speak quickly. I think Councillor Riley has covered it really well. It is a very difficult decision, and not one that I have, not thought about for hours on end, and actually thought about all of last night, to be honest. It's a tough one, and I thank the community. I thank you, Rod, for your contribution and for your advocacy for the community and for heritage for our city. It is really important. I have read all of your emails. I have read all the emails from other objectors. I have where I don't understand an issue. I'm not a planning expert. I don't profess to be one. But when I don't know something, I always seek advice, and I feel satisfied with the officer recommendation on all the reasons that have been outlined tonight. I think I've just gone completely blank.
Take your time.
I think the amendment, I'm trying to kind of, in a way, find some place in the middle in terms of being able to look at the intent of this site and trying to, without being able to retain the building, look at how we can use it in its current, breaking it down into its materials and seeing how we can move it into the new development. I think if this was 2012 when the development design overlay was being approved, and I was standing here then, I think, potentially it could be a very different outcome, but we have progressed. I feel confident. I don't know, I wasn't part of the council then, but I have to trust that the consultation process, that the natural justice process was taken in order to get us to the point we are. And with all that in mind, I'm approving, I'm in support of the officer recommendations. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Dorney. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the application, the motion? Sorry. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against?
Can my vote be recorded?
Yeah. Declare that carried. So do you need a division? No, you just record Councillor Bolton's vote as being against. Thank you. I'll now move to the officers to outline what happens next.
Thank you. So council has just decided to issue a planning permit for the proposed development at 2 Elm Grove, subject to the conditions contained within the amended recommendation. As mentioned, the proposal is exempt from third-party appeal rights. As such, a planning permit rather than a notice of decision to grant a planning permit will issue, and the applicant will have 60 days to appeal any of the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll now move to the final item, which is DCF 4919. Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Just to let you know, I did outline that you had a conflict,
Yes.
but not any of the details.
And I have a conflict of interest in this as I'm a school teacher at the neighbouring site at St Matthew's Primary School, hence my lateness tonight for parent-teacher interviews. My employer is an objector to the application, and therefore I feel as if I have a clear conflict of interest, and so I'll be excusing myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Farnley?
Thank you, Chair. I can see a lot of my neighbours in the gallery tonight. That's probably a good indication I've got a conflict of interest too. So, so just to explain, we've got very clear transparency and governance guidelines here. When there's a permit application where you could either benefit or disadvantage from that permit application, you need to declare a conflict of interest. And given I've got a property in close proximity, I'll be declaring a conflict of interest and not taking part in the vote. So, thank you.
Well done. Thank you. See you tomorrow or some other time. Thank you. Just wait for Councillor Farnley to leave the chamber and then ask the officer, Darren, please, to outline the report.
Thank you. So this is an application at 92 to 104 Lowson Street, Fawkner, and it's for a place of worship. The subject site's located within the neighbourhood residential zone. It's shown on the screen, highlighted in the purple outline. The aerial photograph up on the screen shows the subject site, which is located surrounded by residential houses, typically single-storey detached dwellings. It's also abutting primary school and St Matthew's Primary School further on along Lowson Street. It's an aerial street view of the site, accessed from Lowson Street. And the proposal before us is a retrospective approval of a place of worship, because the operation has been ongoing for quite some time, and this application is to have approval for that use. The proposal includes a maximum of 160 patrons on the site at any one time. There's 51 car spaces proposed, and there's no buildings and works proposed as part of this application. The building on the screen, the map on the screen or plan on the screen shows 2 buildings on the site. The building on the right-hand side is not part of this application. It's a building that was subject to a fire in, I believe, 2016 and is not used. The building on the left-hand side of the site is what's proposed to be used for the place of worship, along with the car parking. The hours of operation proposed are on the screen. It shows that for 3 days of the week it would be closed. Be open on Tuesday 5 till 9, Thursday 5 till 9, Friday 11:30 till 5, and Saturday 5 till 9. There were 25 objections received to this proposal, and the key issues raised were traffic and car parking impacts, noise, inappropriate use in a residential area, and the hours being inappropriate. On the screen is the location of the objectors to the application. The Planning Information and Discussion meeting was held on the 2nd of April 2019, I should say. 11 objectors, Councillor Abood, Councillor Bolton and officers and the applicant attended that meeting. Whilst there were no changes, the applicant did agree to a condition to restrict prayers within the building. The key considerations for this proposal, one being car parking. I note that the proposal exceeds the requirements of the planning scheme in relation to the number of car spaces required. In relation to traffic, it's within the design capacity of the street, and it's an acceptable outcome that's supported by development advice engineers. In terms of the use within a residential area, the proposal is considered an acceptable response to Council's local policy at clause 22.02, discretionary uses in residential zones, Importantly, the amenity impacts can be mitigated by recommended permit conditions, namely the hours, patron numbers and noise. It is recommended to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit, with the key conditions being no amplified music or speech external to the building, the 160 patron limit, the limitation of hours as proposed, that there be no prayers external to the building, and that an attendant be on site on Fridays and other times where more than 100 patrons are on the site to manage the parking, patron numbers, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objectors? Also, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I'm actually here wearing two hats tonight. I was an objector as a resident in Dukes Road, Fawkner, near the Boston Street, where we join onto Boston Street because it's impacted by traffic previously when the place was used as a place of worship. And I'm also here as a 20 years plus school counsellor at Merri-bek Park Primary School. So I'm here representing that school council as well this evening because they, like St Matthew's, have parent-teacher and LED conferences this evening. After having discussed with...
Sorry, I know you, but can we have your name, please?
Oh, didn't I say my name? I apologise. My name is Raylene Neville.
Thank you, Raylene Neville.
Raylene Neville.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have noticed previously with the place of worship, the congestion of traffic, which largely impacts, especially on a Friday when it's the prayer meeting, which was the main concern of our school council, which made us actually put the objection in. It was also one of mine as well. I've read and closely discussed with the principal of the primary school of what we were managed to get off the website that was there on Friday. Apparently, according to this, on page 10, the Council Strategic Transport and Compliance Branch assessed this proposal. It included a review of the submitted traffic report and also a Council Development Engineer traffic survey on Friday the 10th of May 2019. So that was between the hours of 11:30am and 12:30pm, which apparently is during the busy Friday prayer time. Whilst it might be the busy prayer time, it's not actually the time that the primary school children get out of school, and the rear access to Lowson Street from Merri-bek Park Primary School gets used quite extensively, and there is no school crossing out there. There is only a school crossing in Anderson Road, which is problematic as it is anyway, and I'm sure council is aware of that. The assessment concluded that the traffic generation remains within the street's design capacity. I don't know how they could come to that conclusion. One, as far as I'm concerned, the planning permit has not been issued as yet. Is that correct? If the planning permit hasn't been issued as yet, how could there have been a prayer service at the property in Lowson Street on that particular Friday? Because according to this, council met again on the 22nd of May to put forward a recommendation to this meeting, according to them. Yep. So please correct me if I'm incorrect. So our side of things is that we don't believe that that traffic study is actually conducive to the actual traffic volumes of students, and we're talking about primary school age children here. Some of them are latchkey kids that go home on their own. So duty of care, especially for a primary school and any school, is tantamount to everything that we do. So that is our huge issue. How can council submit a traffic report that was not on a prayer day, supposedly between those hours, but when nobody's supposed to be having prayer there, as from what we understand, but we know that the actual buildings have been getting used.
So let me just alert you to the time.
Yep.
If you like, you can put your other hat on. And did you have more that you wanted to say?
No, look, I'm quite happy to go just as one, because the whole issue with the congestion, the parking, because of it, they're just parking everywhere.
Okay,
I'm quite sure others will have plenty to say because they live right opposite the proposed place of worship. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Raylene. I'll hear from the next objector. Yep, sure, come forward.
Thank you. My name is Helen Howden and I'm from St Matthew's Primary School in North Faulkner. I'd like to, on behalf of our school community, we wish to reiterate our objections as we had in the first meeting on the 2nd of April, but we also wanted to take objection to page 10 and the traffic report that was done between 11:30 and 12:30. One of the things that we have as a school is that on Friday afternoons every second week, and I think it happens also on Moomba Park, our special assemblies and special activity days. That particular time, of course, yes, traffic will be quite reasonable at that particular time, but most of these activities or special afternoons or assemblies usually begin just after 2. And the parking then with all our parents and including with Moomba Park becomes quite strategically difficult. It's something that we need to consider because the parking at that particular stage where an assembly, our assemblies are taking place, a Mother's Day assembly, Book Week parade, all those things will impact greatly when there is Friday prayer. And we have to consider those people going to prayer just as we have to consider our children and the children of Moomba Park as well. Thank you.
Very succinct. Thank you, Helen. Next.
Hi, my name's Vicky Ross and I live at 19 Boston Street, which is the street right opposite the gate where they exit. Basically, it's the same with everybody else here. It's about the traffic congestion that we've got there. With the traffic report, I couldn't understand how they could come to that conclusion when there's been no prayers and that there for them to get a true reading of what traffic we've got. I have days that I can't even get into my driveway with the amount of traffic that is parked opposite me. People next door to me have 5 kids, 5 cars. They have a driveway that can only fit 1. The rest are out in the street and opposite. I've got 2 people across the road that have their car parked outside, and I often get the strays in front of my place, which I find coming in and out of my place is a worry, not just for me, for my daughters and their friends that come in and out. Some kids are a little bit inexperienced to manoeuvre that. And I was reading in some of the amendments that there was talk about a permit parking or parking restrictions. So does that mean that we can't apply for a permit and it's just strictly to control the traffic at that certain time? Or, yeah, it was just a concern on what sort of traffic restrictions you would have there that would benefit us as residents. So.
Yep. We can get to the questions. There'll be a heap of questions, so we can probably address that, Vicky. You can stand up and say the same if you like. It's totally up to you. I think we're getting the gist.
She's got to get to them.
You just do as you're told. Just do as you're told. We don't want any trouble.
Got to keep them happy. My name's Les Gando. I live in 21 Boston Street, Faulkner. And much the problem was like the parking, because I work night afternoon shift. Right, sometimes when I come home, and especially when it's Ramadan or whatever it is, I can't get in my driveway, right? And they park across the driveway. Because even a couple of times I've come down into Disney Street, I've seen a car park halfway across, half in Disney and half in Boston Street. So you've got Buckley's hope of getting around. You go ring the police, and all the police say is just ring the councillor. But what council place going to work at 9 o'clock at night? You know, they're all asleep at home. So.
Yeah, we do actually have officers that work at night.
We can get to all the can get to everything.
Yeah.
So finish your piece, Les, and then we'll move on and we'll get to all the questions.
No worries, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Daniel Rosini, I live at 22 Queen Street, Faulkner.
Thank you, Daniel.
Pretty much the same as everyone said here, but the problem is you've got car parks in there now. There's probably about 50, 60 car parks in there now. That's full, and the whole street's full as well. So 51 car parks and 160 patrons, it's not going to work. It's impossible. The street's flooded now and there's car parks on the side, already full. So it should be in a commercial area. Summerden, Campfield, Faulkner's a little domestic area where you drive in for a purpose. You have to drive in and drive out. Should be in a commercial area where traffic's wide, the roads are bigger blocks, do your mosque there, no worries. Not for a little area you got to drive in, for a little purpose and drive back out. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Anyone else? This is the big chance, so if you have anything you want to say. Yep, here we go.
Hi, my name's Robert Polizzi.
Robert.
I'm speaking on the Rossetti family.
Thank you.
At number 24, Glendon Road. Their concerns are more about how many worship centres are in the actual Fawkner area. There's already 3, and now this is going to be the 4th.
When you say 3, can you just specify, do you mean 3 mosques, or do you mean churches or worship areas? So the issue is just that it's a mosque?
Well, it's a mosque. There's 3 other mosques in the Fawkner area.
Yep.
This will be the 4th mosque in the area.
Yep.
And they're thinking there's a bit of an influx of mosques in one particular spot. So they're concerned about how many mosques are in one area.
Okay.
It's like, how many McDonald's stores you can have within a certain
churches.
area. Or churches.
Yeah.
So
Or
same
temples,
thing.
Buddhist
whichever
temples. Yeah,
whatever.
I get it.
So the question is that allowed in the Moreland Council? Obviously it is, and this is what the concerns were.
Yeah.
The other concern was the number of patrons to the square metres of the building. No one's told us how big the building is. Can you clarify the size of the building with the number of patrons? So square metre rate versus patrons. Maybe you can have some clarification on that, please.
Sure.
And the hours were discussed earlier, so we just need clarification. And the other thing is the attendant on the Fridays. Who is it done by? Who prepares it? Council, or does the facility itself provide someone to accommodate for the 100 patrons on site to manage the parking? So we need more clarification on that, and conditions on the planning permit be more specific.
Can I just clarify what you mean by attendant? Do you mean like
It says
somebody?
attended on site on Fridays and
Oh,
other
right,
times where there's more than 100 patrons.
Oh, yes, I get it. All right,
So
sure.
we need more specific
Yeah.
conditions on planning permits, so those are actually met.
Maybe someone might have that person's phone number or...
Well, we want it as a condition of the permit, so if it's breached, we can actually act on it.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay?
Okay, so
Thank you.
anyone else? You just have had your 3.5 minutes, Roleen. Now, so is there a representative for the applicant here? Okay, please come forward. There were quite a few questions included in that, but feel free to give your presentation and we can just go through all the questions as well.
Right, so good evening, councillors. My name is Anthony Scaparci from Clement Stone Town Planners on behalf of the applicant. So I'd first like to say that this is a proposal that's been formed in close consultation with council from its early stages. We're grateful for the consultative nature so far that has been handled. The site has a long history as a place of worship in Moreland, dating back to 1996. The existing permit allowed for a prayer hall and school building with hours of operation between 9 AM to 9 PM Monday to Sunday. The application before council tonight proposes to seek planning approval for the ongoing use of the site as a place of worship within the former school building. As already stated, the permit seeks operating hours between 5 PM to 9 PM Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, and between 11:30 AM to 5 PM on Fridays. Services are proposed to run for a maximum of 1 to 2 hours, and there is only one service per day. The permit seeks a maximum patronage of 160 patrons on the site at any given time. However, the centre has advised that the typical attendance for regular services is between 50 to 70 people. A number of objections were received to the application. We thank council for providing us the opportunity to respond to these on the 2nd of April. The application demonstrates a high level of compliance with the policy objectives of the Moreland Planning Scheme. The application responds to the purposes of the neighbourhood residential zone, which seeks to allow educational, recreational, religious and community and a limited range of other non-residential uses to serve local community needs in appropriate locations. The site is appropriately located in proximity to the Fawkner Neighbourhood Centre and a range of other smaller local centres, is within the principal public transport network and serves an identified need of providing a place of worship to the high number of people within Fawkner that adhere to the Islamic faith. A place of worship is compatible within this neighbourhood and aligns with other similar uses, such as schools and churches to the north and east of the site. The surrounding residential amenity is protected through the confined hours of operation sought by the permit. There is no music or amplified sound to be played within the site. Prayer services will be confined to within the building, and noise impacts related to the use are proposed to be kept to a minimum. A total of 51 car spaces are present within the site, allowing for a car parking rate of 0.3 spaces per person. The current on-site car parking spaces are sufficient to accommodate the patron numbers requested and to meet the requisite car parking requirements. The application has been assessed by Council's Strategic Transport Department and the project traffic engineers. It was concluded that the expected traffic generation during the busy Friday afternoon peak is within the street's design capacity and is not expected to result in unreasonable traffic issues. Members of the centre have previously manned the entrance gates to direct traffic to and from the site and have broadcast messages encouraging attendees to respect the adjoining residences when parked on the street. The centre welcomes Condition 5, which stipulates the car parking attendant, which will help ensure the residential amenity of this neighbourhood is protected. I know there's been previous discussions regarding the implementation of on-street car parking restrictions at the front of the site along Lowson Street. Should Council wish to trial these restrictions, the centre would have no objection. The current on-site car parking can readily accommodate the congregation, and the centre has indicated a willingness to comply with any parking restrictions that may be implemented along Lowson Street and the surrounding streets. To conclude, the application has paid appropriate regard to the surrounding residential amenity of the neighbourhood, and in considering the high level of compliance with the Moreland Planning Scheme, respectfully request that councillors uphold council's decision and direct that a notice of decision to grant the planning permit be issued for the subject site.
Thank you, Anthony. Councillors, questions? Yep.
Would the applicant be happy to include or publicly post a contact number, so if residents have issues with parking, that they know exactly who to approach to deal with the issue?
Yeah,
if there's an issue.
Okay, the gallery, you guys have to keep stum on this, and we'll just let Anthony answer the questions, and we'll let the councillors ask the questions, mostly because we've already had the PID, and I know that a lot of you were there, and that is an open forum for discussion, but we just might try and keep it formal. I know that it's hard to not yell out stuff.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to seek further instruction from my client in relation to that. I don't believe there would be an issue. It's just a matter of who that person was. So if I could take that question on notice and get back to you, I'm happy to provide, seek instruction to provide that contact detail for council.
And if I could just clarify, if you were thinking that you would have, because I've been to some events in the past where it's a security guard who is responsible for the parking attendant job, so potentially a mobile that has the same number that is handed to the lead security guard each shift or event, so that it isn't a matter of lost in translation, we don't know who to ring. There's just a number, and whoever's in charge has the phone with that number on it.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could put that proposal as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Yep. I know there's a growing interest for creating more walkable communities in Fawkner and really promoting that amongst the community, particularly as traffic conditions just become worse and worse. I'm just wondering about encouraging active transport and, within...
Definitely. Not quite walkable, but in terms of sustainable transport, we did provide bicycle racks to the front of the site. There are 2 bicycle racks there. That does comply with the relevant provision in terms of bicycle facilities. So we've listened to council's concerns at RFI stage, and we have implemented that in relation to bicycle facilities.
And I've got a question just actually to either Helen or Raylene about the schools. Maybe, Anthony, if you want to just sit down for a sec. Just about, it's a similar kind of question to Councillor Dorney, but just about walking school bus, or whether there's, my kids are grade 4, what are they? Grade 3, 4 and 5. It's grade 3, 5 and 6, something. But they're at the age where they can ride a bike to school now on their own. And I'm just wondering what the flexibility is with regard to the schools in terms of encouraging parents to get out of cars with their kids and stuff as well. And Raylene, you'll share. Share.
We should have order out. At Moomba Park, they do have like that walking parents to school. There's the big blue things on the footpaths and everything. We do have several children that do ride their push bikes to school.
Good.
But Moomba Park is also a little bit more special because they do have the special needs component under the autism spectrum that they run at the school. And it's run in conjunction with the Autism Australia. It's worth lots and lots of money. So we have a lot of people that are actually coming to the school. We are a school that tends to be a bit of a holding pen. It's like a revolving door. We only have something like, I think it's 264 students, but we can have an actual revolving door capacity of about 180 students throughout the year, because we get them come in and they go out for all different sorts of reasons. So yes, the school is very proactive in wanting children to walk to school, but because we have people bringing them in from Campbellfield and Broadmeadows, over at Hatfield, etc. The schools can only do so much because ostensibly we're there to educate children, not to educate the parents.
Yeah, so that's a good point, but there also is an obligation, and we have this position here where we have declared a climate emergency. So we're very keen to help promote walkable neighbourhoods, but also these kids are going to grow up, they're not going to own cars. It's just what's going to happen. If they're 5, it's going to be completely different. They might still use cars, but I'm interested to maybe see if there's an opportunity for council to follow up with either of or both of the schools about how we can help you facilitate the encouragement of walking as well. And I understand that there's a component of special needs, but maybe that's something we can take offline. Helen?
I'd like to add to that, and I agree with the special needs that you have. We've got 340 students, and many of ours are refugees, and parents are very reluctant to let their children go on their own.
Sure.
And that's something that we are very aware of. We are trying very hard to educate them and to make them feel very comfortable and feel safe at St Francis, as you know, at any school. So it is something that they do, and we are having more and more children walk to school, but it is still something that it is a cultural thing as well.
Yep.
Work in progress.
Thank you. Very good. I just had a question for officers about the permit parking, and to let you know, Vicky, that we can look at rolling out, like, what level of permit parking exists in those neighbouring streets at the moment, and what opportunity is there to roll out more so that residents, because you already live there, are entitled to a permit, and what that might look like? Does that sound like a question?
Just to clarify, are you asking what existing parking restrictions there are?
Yeah, and whether there are opportunities for us to roll out more. I believe it's in the report as well, but I'm just clarifying the detail of what we can do in terms of managing the parking.
So I couldn't say exactly what the permit restrictions are and the extent of those. Those details will be in the submission, but I don't have them at hand. But I do know that the traffic engineers that assessed the application did note that that is a possibility. And council does have a system in place in which areas that are not restricted could be made restricted, subject to that process.
Yep. Okay. Then the other question I had was to do with the traffic, the timing of the consultation, the timing of the surveying of the traffic. I was under the impression that there are already people worshipping at the mosque, and have been since it was deemed habitable after the fire. So can I just confirm that there were prayers when these traffic reports were done or not?
That's correct.
There were. Okay. And so just to clarify, this is what do you call it when it's a retrospective permit? So they're getting a permit for something that's already happening, which is why it's not a situation where it's very straightforward, like we want to build a building, we've got the permit, we build the building. This is sort of after the fact, or updating what was an older permit that's changed its conditions. Are there any other questions from councillors? No? So what I'll do is ask for a motion regarding this. Councillor Walton?
I'll move the officer recommendation with one small amendment to condition 5 to add a point E, that a contact number be provided to residents or displayed for residents in the event of parking issues or something along those lines.
Yep. So we'll just try and get some words happening.
That would be fine.
Sorry, councillor, but sorry, Mayor. Has anyone justified the number of patrons to the size of the building? Did anyone answer that question?
Yeah, let me just, did we?
That hasn't been answered.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. Did we, can we say the square meterage of the size of the building? Do we know that?
So the dimensions are not on the plan in terms of the size of the building. I approximate it, whether the applicant add more, but I approximate it to be about 400 square metres.
Yeah, and there's 3 separate rooms, isn't there?
That's correct.
3 separate prayer rooms. Pardon?
I think there's more than that in the plan.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm happy to second Councillor Bolton's motion, and I was under the impression Councillor Dornier had an amendment about bicycle parking.
Raise the amendment before I speak to the motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll just let officers pull that up. It just relates to the bicycle parking infrastructure. And it's just an additional condition for additional parking, bike parking. A minimum of, I'd actually like to change that from 6 to 8, please. Yes.
Happy for me. I'm fine with
Yep. Thank you.
amendment. For that. I think I definitely do understand that there are traffic issues and parking issues in this area, especially when the schools come out, and also in the nearby residential streets. My impression, though, of some of the parking difficulties separate to the schools coming out is that I think there does need to be some sort of assistance to residents from council in terms of looking at the whole traffic situation in the area. And I actually think in some parts, probably on Lowson Street and maybe the parts of nearby streets that are closest to Lowson Street probably need hockey stick line markings, you know, in terms of giving drivers guidance about how far they should, the distance they should park from driveways and so forth. I think there are a number of things that council needs to look at and examine that are sort of separate from this application to try and improve the lives of residents in terms of traffic, because my feeling is that the traffic, yes, the patronage of the prayer centre do contribute to the traffic issues in the area, but I also think there are pre-existing issues in the area that need to be addressed by council, that won't be addressed just by, you know, not giving the go-ahead to this prayer centre. I also feel, for me, in supporting this application, one thing that is guiding me is the fact that this has been used since 1996. If this was a new application in a residential area, I think I would have a different viewpoint. But I feel that this has had ongoing use, and I think some of the conditions will actually improve the lives of the residents. Might not be to total satisfaction of the residents, but I think the fact that all of the activities are to be conducted inside the building, no amplification outside the building. It's quite a big site. I think some of the and the actual condition of an attendant, I think, could make a big difference. I know that made a big difference around Darrell Ullum in terms of dealing with some of the parking issues there. I think that would be a better situation for residents than the current situation, where I don't think there is a parking attendant at the moment. So I feel that the conditions sort of try and deal with the residents' concerns, maybe don't totally deal with them, but I think it will be a better situation for residents than the current situation where the prayer centre is already operating. But I also think council needs to, beyond this meeting, look at the traffic situation in those surrounding streets and Lowson Street. And probably also the other thing for the Moomba Park Primary School is council probably needs to provide a parking crossing supervisor at Lowson Street.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. So I just would like to echo everything that Councillor Bolton just said, and something that was made very apparent to me, and I heard it again today, is that the traffic issues exist already, problematic as it is anyway. So I think the fact that, we have a suburb which is Fawkner where people can't not own cars. It's just not really an option. There's little or no public transport. It's fairly isolated. It's not the kind of suburb like Brunswick where we say anybody who can live without a car, get rid of it. This is a suburb where people do own cars. They own several cars. They own a car for mum and dad and they own 3 cars for the kids. That's not up for dispute, but it does need management. And I think that it's council's responsibility under rates, roads and rubbish that we help you to resolve that. And I think that permit restrictions might be the answer, because even if you've just got 1 car in, you still could have 3 cars on the street with a permit. So I think that, to echo what Councillor Bolton said, we need to work through that with the community. I think that it's worth highlighting that the same as there is, Anglican, Protestant, evangelical, there's all different types of churches, the mosques are all different. So even if there is 5, they're very specifically different groups and don't necessarily worship at each other's mosques. And so I don't really have an issue with the fact that there are however many number of mosques, and I think it's important to make note of winding back from 9 to 9 Monday to Sunday to close 3 days a week. One day is, the long day is only 6 hours now, and then the other days is sort of 3 hours. So I think that that's got the numbers down a lot in terms of how often the place is open. But I am aware that there is a very real problem where people are inclined to park all over the street, up on the footpath, across people's driveways, squeezed into a gap that's too big for 2 cars and all that kind of stuff. So I think what needs to happen is we need to rely on you, the community, to help us work through in terms of a bit of enforcement, and just the operators of the mosque will need to work with council and residents as well to just educate the patrons who are worshipping in the mosque that get in and park in the car park. If you don't park in the car park, it's going to have ramifications, whether it's getting a ticket or whatever that looks like. And we're going to have a transition period where we educate everyone about the way to make that work for everyone. And I think it can be done the same as, when you have a busy primary school or you have any other busy operator in the city, you have to work out what the rules are so that it can work well. I think that because what we're doing is applying this retrospectively, all we've done really is turned up that there are issues that exist already and we need to help resolve them. So are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Martin?
I'd just like to speak against one element of the motion, and that was Councillor Bolton's point E that was added on, providing a phone number. I don't think that we should be providing, the mosque should be providing a phone number. I think all issues should be directed through council. I think that there potentially could be a situation where somebody calls up, is frustrated that somebody's parked over their driveway, they call the number and there's a series of abuse exchanged, and then nothing happens. And what we actually need to happen is you need to contact us, we need to go up there and we need to find whoever's parked incorrectly. And so I would like point E split out, and I'd like to vote on that separately. I think with the parking issues that you're experiencing, as a council, we've got a new parking management policy. A lot of the issues that you're talking about can be resolved through a combination of maybe one side of the street has some permit parking, has some 2-hour parking or some 5-hour parking. We can even change the time zones. It's all in the policy. What we require is residents to contact us and raise these issues, because what happens a lot and time again in the city is that residents suffer in silence. Then they come to this forum and then they say to us, you've done nothing about it. And then we turn around and say, well, have you told us about it? And so I really want to highlight that we want to work with you to resolve a lot of these issues, because a lot of them, it's really solvable. One of the other things that we did as a council is we actually put longer hours for our parking enforcement officers, so early mornings and late at nights. And so you can actually get those people who are parking over your crossovers of a morning during school times, for example, or even longer. And so that's something that as a council, we know that that's a problem. We really want to work with you on that one. So for the point that I just discussed, I'd like to separate E out, but largely everything else, I'm fully supportive of what my fellow councillors have said. You know, this has been in existence for a number of years. They're just really changing buildings. So I think it's an improvement. Prayers are inside. They're not going to be outside now, and it's actually closed for 3 days of a week. So I feel like this is an improvement for residents in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. So what I'll do is I will take that point E out to be addressed separately. So, Councillor...
we should vote on that first before the resolution.
Yep.
If we're going to have it separate, can we speak?
Yep, we will get to that. So, because it was your amendment, did you want to speak in favour of...
Councillor Martin is moving that we remove that amendment.
Yep.
And so I'd like to speak on that.
Yes.
Yep. So do you want to speak to the amendment, or do you want to speak to the proposal of removing it?
Well,
speak against its removal.
I want to speak against the removal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to speak against the removal of that point. I mean, yes, it is possible that it could be used by, people to, just ring and abuse and so forth. But I actually think at Darul Ulam, where they do have a contact number available for residents, I think it has been useful because council parking attendants aren't available all of the time. Possibly we could change that to be phone number for an attendant as well as a council contact or parking contact number. Must be displayed at the Lowson Street entry to give people the option of both contacting council and the prayer centre. But I think if parking officers aren't available to come straight away and someone's done the wrong thing and the attendant hasn't noticed because they've parked not on Lowson Street but in a nearby street, then I think it would just be helpful for the community, but also the prayer centre as well, in terms of having good contact with each other, I think.
Thank you,
Councillor. I mean, I'm not dying a ditch over it, but but I think it would be useful.
And as the seconder to the amendment, ultimately, I also think that it's fine, because if it's the same phone during events and whoever's in charge of being the attendant on that day during the events, I think there's an opportunity here for, the phone to ring and Raylene, for example, to say, Amir, somebody's got their car, this is the number plate, go tell them to move it. That guy has a direct connection with the people inside the mosque and can go and say, go move your car. There's a very good chance that it might actually work, potentially putting, the worst case scenario of this scenario is people call the police. So then it's a matter of if the police can get there and ask people to move their cars or find who owns the car. The other thing to do is maybe add a council number as well.
Sorry, I realise that we're probably debating an amendment and I haven't got a seconder.
Well, no, we're debating the removal of the amendment. Well, so what we're doing is it's been taken out, okay, and we're debating whether that amendment is staying. Like, we're voting on point E.
So I'm moved, for clarification, I moved the motion with this.
Right.
And so basically councillor Martin wants to see it removed, which in a sense in effect is an amendment.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how I'm interpreting it.
So is there a seconder for the removal of point E then?
Yeah, I'm happy to second it.
For the sake of the debate that we've already been having?
Yes.
So just for the governance of this particular scenario, Councillor Martin has proposed that point E be removed and Councillor Riley has seconded that. Councillor Bolton and I have already spoken to why it shouldn't be, and now Councillor Martin and Riley are welcome to speak to why it should be removed.
Look, I appreciate the efforts that are going on here. I think we'll get to some sort of happy medium, because I don't want to die in a ditch over it either, Councillor Bolton. I think one of my concerns I might share with Councillor Martin is that requiring this in this is something that I perhaps find a little bit too excessive. I think this could be actually well and truly worked out on a less formal basis, that this could still happen whether it goes into the tonight's sorry, I can't even think what we're talking to this approval for the application. So it doesn't need to form to be part of that. I think that what you're saying is eminently sensible, that could all happen, but it doesn't need to be required in here. So, and I know that we're sort of splitting hairs a little bit, but in a way I don't want it to be required. I think it would be just good practice for the community to get together and work this through without being part of this process. A little bit like we talked about with the car parking and the other arrangements. They don't need to be, and they can't be form part of this. I think they can still be worked out apropos of what happens in tonight's decision. So it's essential as that. I think it's a good idea. I just don't think we necessarily need to condition it.
Are there any councillors that would like to speak for or against this point E being removed or kept? So what I'll do is I'll just put the point E aspect to the vote. So all those in favour of leaving it in there? And all those in favour of removing it? So there's 6 of us in the room and I voted in favour, so it stays in there. I'm not so fond of having the casting vote, I have to say. Makes things fairly tight.
Decided. It's good. We've made a decision.
Lost on the casting vote of the mayor. So now we'll go back to the, thank you, substantive motion, which includes the point E. And Councillor Bolton and I have spoken. Councillor Martin has spoken. Are there any councillors that would like to speak for or against the motion?
I just want to address one point. I can't remember the gentleman, what was your name? Daniel. Daniel raised a question about the number of, I can't remember what your actual words were. No, it was in terms of the mosque or place of worship.
There was another.
Oh, was that not you? Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, someone raised, was that yourself? Raised a question, and I mean, I actually, that rings some alarm bells for me. I'll just say it straight outright, that it to me creates, there's an undertone of us and them in there. I think that there's places of worship all over Fawkner. There's many different types, and I think diversity and richness of diversity and really fostering that can make a community all the better. And we've seen examples of that. Fawkner has one of the richest diversities. We also, have a lot of new migrants moving in, and it is changing. And I think that there is a portion of the community that are fighting against that. and there's some, I don't know what it is, if it's fear, but I think we need to break that down. And I actually voted to take out that last amendment because to me, it seemed like it wasn't about having a positive conversation with that person. It was only if there was a problem that there would be a conversation. And so that's why, if a parking attendant's there and then someone's having a problem, so rather than just coming and having a conversation with that person, they need to call a number to, I don't know, there's some undertones here that I'm just saying. I know a lot of, I have, a lot of Muslim colleagues, I have a lot of Muslim friends, and there's so much beauty there, and I'm just saying that I feel like there's a little us and them happening here, and I just want to make sure that that's not occurring. So in response to the planning application, which I've gone a little bit off track, but the presence of other like facilities has no bearing on whether the proposal is acceptable response to the Moreland planning scheme. So I'd just like to say that. And I'm not judging, I'm just, as someone observing tonight, that's just something I may not be correct, but that's just something that I've observed. So I'd just like to share that.
Thank you, Councillor Dorney. Are there any councillors who would...
Just quickly,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Just to speak on this as well, look, I really appreciate your presence here tonight and everyone's contributions, and I concur with Councillor Dorney's remarks. I think there may be obviously some tensions, but in that light, I'd like to invite people to consider having some open houses and having some times where we get into each other's patch, because we are all in this community, we have been in this community, and as a teacher, as a councillor, and as somebody who's been in Moreland for many years, I'd like to encourage that. So I'm not, again, it's just this has got really nothing to do with the actual application, but I think in terms of creating community and having good neighbourly relations, sorting through the parking problems, sorting through the problems when we do have someone who's obstructing, we need to get that fixed. And it would be really good to get to know each other a bit more in terms of our backgrounds and our, what our people have been on committees for 20 years. It's a great contribution. We've got to celebrate that and celebrate what people bring to the community. So I just would like to encourage that in closing, and hope that my councillors will endorse this recommendation as it's amended.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. I think I'm put this to the vote. Yes. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
Noted.
Unanimous. So I now throw to the officer to outline the next steps.
The council decided to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit in accordance with the ultimate motion. All objector parties and the applicant will receive a copy of the decision. Objectors have 28 days in which to appeal that decision, and the applicant has 60 days in which to appeal any permit conditions to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So I'll now move to urgent business. There are no urgent business items to consider tonight, so that concludes the business that we have for this evening's meeting. Councillors, members of the gallery, and to our viewers live streaming at home, I declare the council meeting for planning and related matters closed at 9:25, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you.